Chapter 34:21. Hearing her husband Qin Ye's words, Wuxia turned to look at him. What? You don't have confidence in the region lord? Do you think that we and the region lord are working blindly and are destined to have no results? Qin Yi nodded and said, although I can't say that I'm 100% sure, I'm more than 90% sure. Wuxia waved her hand and said, there should still be hope. Didn't Stellar Aspect Emissary say that? A few foreign race godly kings are fleeing south. According to their route, they will definitely pass through our Fire Mulberry region. They will even pass through the Fire Mulberry Empire. We have set up god arrays and ambushes in all the important roads. Especially in the Fire Mulberry Empire, we even set up an inescapable net. As long as those foreign race godly kings pass by, we will definitely find them and delay them. No, you're wrong. Qin Yi hurriedly shook his head and explained, although Stellar Aspect Emissary said that they will pass through the Fire Mulberry Empire, I also want to find them and stop them. This way we can all make a great contribution and obtain Stellar Aspect Emissary's gratitude and favor. But this is clearly unrealistic. Think about it, those foreign race godly kings committed a crime, they will definitely run away as fast as possible. We all know that they will definitely pass through the Fire Mulberry region. Then as long as they are not idiots, they will definitely take a detour. Originally, searching for them in the Fire Mulberry region is like looking for a needle in a haystack. If they take a detour to other regions or disguise themselves, hide their aura, etc., then we will have no hope. Hearing this, Wuxia's will wavered. She said a little unhappily, hearing you say this, our chances of success are indeed not high. Then what do you say? We can't persuade the region lord to give up, right? Although he has been continuously casting spells for a month and has consumed a lot of divine power, he must be exhausted. But he is old friends with Stellar Aspect Emissary and is very concerned about this matter. He most likely won't listen to our advice. Qin Yi thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. That's right. It's impossible to make the region lord give up. I just want to remind you not to have too much hope so that you won't be disappointed. And I know. Wuxia pursed her lips, feeling a little down. Qin Yi didn't want to talk about this anymore. He quickly changed the topic and asked, oh right, there's something I don't know if you've heard about it? 10 days ago, the Emperor of the Sanglan Empire sent me a message to report the situation. It was said that a young divine blacksmith suddenly appeared in the Sanglan Empire and appeared at the Fire Dragon Mountain, announcing that he would stay there for 10 years. That young divine craftsman claimed to be a peerless divine craftsman and planned to take in a few disciples. All the artifact craftsmen in the Fire Mulberry domain could go to Fire Dragon Mountain to visit him. If anyone was dissatisfied, they could challenge him in the art of crafting. As long as they were talented enough, he could also guide and teach them. So much so that he would even choose the person with the most potential among the armament refining grandmasters to be his direct disciple. Really? Wuxia frowned and asked with interest, a young divine blacksmith? Was he also a divine king? That was definitely a god king from another region. However, he actually called himself a peerless divine craftsman. This was too arrogant. These youngsters nowadays are too insolent. Wuxia curled her lips with a disdainful expression. Suddenly she thought of something and asked again, oh right, doesn't our Fire Mulberry domain have a heavenly smelting divine craftsman? Don't the most talented artifact craftsmen all learn from the heavenly smelting divine craftsman? That young divine craftsman doing this, isn't he wrecking the heavenly smelting divine craftsman's show? Forget about the heavenly smelting divine craftsman, even those disciples and grand disciples of the heavenly smelting divine craftsman wouldn't let him off either, right? Isn't that so? Qin Yi hurriedly nodded and said with a light smile, I heard that these few days several disciples of the heavenly smelting divine craftsman all went to Fire Dragon Mountain to challenge that peerless divine craftsman. Guess what happened in the end? Wuxia raised her eyebrows and said carelessly, is there still a need to guess? They were definitely all defeated. That person was a divine king powerhouse, a true divine craftsman. No matter how top or how talented an artifact craftsman is, it's impossible to compare to a divine craftsman. Qin Yi was stunned for a moment and explained, you're not wrong to say that, and the result was indeed so. However, that peerless divine craftsman didn't take advantage of them either. The rules of his challenge are very interesting. The opponent can choose what grade of divine weapon to refine. I heard that those disciples of the heavenly smelting divine craftsman competed with him in refining a monarch-level high-grade divine weapon to see who could refine it faster and with better quality. But even so, those disciples of the heavenly smelting divine craftsman still lost miserably. After a pause, Qin Yi continued, however, those masters were not convinced and felt that this challenge was unfair, so they prepared to jointly invite the heavenly smelting divine craftsman to come out of the mountain and get back at him. It's a pity that we have to help the domain lord search for those foreign race divine kings, so we can't leave for now. Otherwise, I would want to personally watch the battle and see how capable that peerless divine general is. Wu Shui was also very interested when she heard this and asked with a frown, will the heavenly smelting divine craftsman agree to such a thankless task? If he wins against that peerless divine craftsman, it's fine, everyone will think that it's reasonable who asked him to be a senior of the artifact crafting Dao. But if he loses to that peerless divine craftsman, his own reputation will be ruined. Qin Yi thought for a moment and said with a serious expression, originally, I also thought that such a shrewd old fox like the heavenly smelting divine craftsman would definitely not agree. But now that the matter has spread, the entire Fire Mulberry domain is discussing this matter. Countless artifact crafting grandmasters and forces are filled with righteous indignation, jointly requesting the heavenly smelting divine craftsman to fight and help the Fire Mulberry domain regain face. You say, this matter has risen to the dignity and glory of the Fire Mulberry domain. No matter how unwilling the heavenly smelting divine craftsman is, he can only bite the bullet and go. Wu Shui nodded slightly and said, if that's the case then it'll be lively. Unfortunately we can't leave and can't personally go to Fire Dragon Mountain to watch the battle. Oh right, you have to keep in touch with Sanglon Emperor, it's best to let him report the latest progress every day. The husband and wife were communicating via voice transmission, discussing the gossip of the two divine craftsmen. At this moment the divine formation in the hall suddenly sped up. Above Divine King White Phoenix's head, a dazzling light suddenly lit up, folding and interweaving into a dazzling light screen. On that five-colored flame light screen, an endless mountain range actually appeared, as well as the silhouette of some majestic cities. There was a long and narrow divine light, like the tail flame of a meteor, flying over the mountain range and the city. Even though the image on the light screen was rather blurry and not very clear. But Qin Yi and Wu Shui were startled awake, and they both stared at the five-colored light screen with wide eyes, revealing expressions of deep joy and surprise. There's news. Quickly look, Lord Region Lord must have found it. Chapter 34-22. The five-colored light screen above Divine King White Phoenix's head was still changing. Qin Yi and Wu Shui were both excited as they stared at the screen without blinking. The couple observed for a while before Wu Shui noticed the godly light in the sky and frowned. Can that streak of divine light be the alien God King we are searching for? Qin Yi nodded in agreement and murmured, look at the godly light's appearance and speed, it doesn't look like a few godly kings but more like a godly ship? Wu Shui exclaimed, this is unbelievable. Domain Lord's Eye of Annihilation is indeed the bloodline inheritance of the godly beast Fire Phoenix. It has such a miraculous effect. Qin Yi stared at the screen for a while and raised his eyebrows. Look at the mountains and cities that the ship flew past, it seems to be the north of Fire Mulberry domain. I remember now that mountain range should be the Lingyue mountain of the Qiling Empire. In other words, the alien deity kings are in the kingdom of Qiling right now. Wu Shui nodded and said excitedly, we've finally found it. Our chance to do something is here. I'll send a message to the Emperor of the Qiling Empire and have him lead troops to the Lingyue mountain to stop them. As she spoke, Wu Shui impatiently took out her communication jade slip and was about to send a message. But Qin Yi was calmer and stopped her. Don't. We don't know if this is real time or if it happened before. Plus, even if you send a message to the Emperor of the Qiling Empire now, he won't be able to get there in time. Don't you know how fast a godly ship is? Wu Shui was instantly at a loss for words. Her hand that was holding the communication jade slip froze in midair. Luckily, Divine King White Phoenix stopped casting and the five-colored light screen above his head disappeared. The divine formation around him also gradually stopped operating. He opened his eyes and exhaled a mouthful of turbid air, wiping away the beads of sweat on his forehead. For a month he had to cast a secret art and activate the Eye of Annihilation every day. It was extremely tiring for him. Especially just now when he had seen through the secrets of the universe and deduced the traces of the unfamiliar Divine King's aura. He had expended a large amount of divine power. After resting for a while, Divine King White Phoenix stood up and walked out of the divine formation. Qin Yi and Wu Shui hurried over and asked about the situation with concern. Domain Lord, how is your situation? Are you tired? Do you want to take a break? Lord Domain Lord, was the scene you deduced just now the traces of those foreign race god kings? Divine King White Phoenix nodded and said, although I've been casting spells continuously for a month, I'm indeed tired and exhausted. I really want to circulate my energy and recuperate for a few days. However, the scene that I predicted just now was indeed the location of those alien god kings. They had just passed by Lingyue Mountain in the kingdom of Qiling, so they should still be in the kingdom of Qiling. As expected, Stellar Aspect Emissary did not mention that those foreign race god kings were very arrogant and confident. They did not take a detour to other regions and headed all the way south to the Fire Mulberry region. Next they will leave the Qiling Empire, enter the Sanglon Empire and then the Huasang Empire. Divine King White Phoenix's tone was steady and powerful, and it was also filled with dignity. After explaining the situation he continued, as of now, no one has found any traces of the foreign race's god kings. Therefore I cannot rest for the time being, I have to report this news to Stellar Aspect Emissary. At the same time, we have to take action immediately and gather a large number of god monarchs to intercept that godship. Qin Yi and Wu Shui quickly cupped their hands and bowed, saying yes in unison. However, Qin Yi hesitated and reminded, Lord Domain Lord, to intercept those foreign race god kings, not only do we have to gather a large number of god monarchs, they must be high-level god monarchs. It's a pity that the high-level god monarchs that we can gather are scattered all over the Fire Mulberry region. It will take a long time to gather them. Even if you give the order to the various empires to give the god monarchs special rights and allow them to gather through the teleportation formation. However, I estimate that they will need at least 3 days to gather. Divine King White Phoenix frowned and thought for a while, then nodded slightly and said, 3 days is enough for that godship to leave the Qiling Empire and enter the Sanglon Empire. When we are done gathering and ready to intercept them, that godship will probably leave the Sanglon Empire again. In such a rush, I am worried that there will be an accident or that the god monarchs are weak. Sigh. Wu Shui quickly comforted, Lord Domain Lord, don't worry. The high-level god monarchs under our command are all elite soldiers. If you feel that we are too hasty to intercept that godship after gathering, you are worried that there will be an accident. Then why don't we wait at ease and guard the borders of the Fire Mulberry Empire after gathering? Anyway, that godship will go all the way south. After passing through the Sanglon Empire, it will definitely enter the Fire Mulberry Empire. We will wait for the rabbit to come out of a tree stump. We will be fully prepared and can also set up traps and ambushes in advance. Lord Domain Lord, what do you think? Divine King White Phoenix frowned and thought for a while, then nodded and said, I have weighed the pros and cons. This seems to be the best choice. Anyway, we know the whereabouts of that godship, but those foreign race god kings don't know our plan. Then let's do it this way. Qin Yi and Wu Shui revealed gratified smiles and quickly nodded, saying, yes, Lord Domain Lord. Lord Domain Lord, then we'll go and pass down the order right now and start gathering the various forces. You can also just happen to recuperate for a few days. Divine King White Phoenix nodded his head in agreement and said with a wave of his hand, all right, this matter will be left to you all to handle. This king is going to rest. Qin Yi and Wu Shui said goodbye, then turned around and left with quick steps. Divine King White Phoenix also returned to the hidden chamber in his bedroom, consumed divine pills and meditated to regulate his breathing. Before long, the high-level god lords scattered all over the Fire Mulberry region received the summons and orders. Immediately, 200 high-level god lords all started moving, returning to the Fire Mulberry Empire from all over. The various major empires' emperors also received the domain lords' orders. They opened up special privileges one after another, opening up transmission divine arrays for many high-level god lords. All in all, a powerful force was currently gathering rapidly, waiting for that godship in the north to walk right into the trap. At the same time, Ji Tianxing roamed the Five Elements world for a long time and also figured out the situation. The reality was just as he saw. The Five Elements world indeed expanded twice. Not only did the entire star become twice as large, the cultivation resources on the star also became very abundant. Even the trillions of living beings on the star were also rapidly multiplying and expanding. The various continents also became more prosperous. The various races' martial Daoists also became even more glorious and prosperous. What made Ji Tianxing most surprised was that after the Five Elements world's territory skyrocketed several times, the resources and heaven and earth's spiritual energy also increased several times. This led to the various races having geniuses as plentiful as clouds, powerhouses emerging in large numbers. Not only did the number of martial gods increase greatly, even a true god powerhouse even appeared. Chapter 34-23. Back then, many experts of the Five Elements world had joined forces to fight against the invasion of the Heaven Punisher race. After an arduous battle, many experts defended the Five Elements world and destroyed the invasion plan of the Heaven Punisher race. However, in that long battle the Five Elements world had paid a huge price. Martial god Tianju had gone astray and was killed by Ji Tianxing. Martial god Tai Hao had died in battle against the Heaven Punisher race's southern marshal. Martial god Luo Shui had also chosen to sacrifice himself in order to help Yun Yao. The three divine masters had fallen one after another. Even the messenger of the divine ruins and fairy Yu Qing, who lived in seclusion, had sacrificed their lives to protect the Five Elements world. From then on only Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao and Ji Ku were left in the Five Elements world. When they brought the Five Elements world to wander the starry sky to take revenge on the Heaven Punisher race, there were no more martial gods in the Five Elements world. Only many martial sages were left, guarding the three divine kingdoms and many other forces. Ji Tianxing had always thought that the Five Elements world would need at least a few hundred years to recover after suffering such a heavy blow. However, he did not expect that in just 100 years, not only had the Five Elements world recovered, but it had also become more prosperous than before. Not only had more than 10 martial sages become martial gods, but they also guarded the three divine kingdoms. The strongest among them had broken through the limit of the martial god realm and become a true god. And that person was Kenshin's disciple Huanglong Daoist. Therefore, in the current Five Elements world, because of Huanglong Daoist, this true god pillar of Heaven's mountain was already worthy of being called the number one force. Ji Tianxing was both shocked and gratified when he discovered this situation. What shocked him was that the Five Elements world had recovered so quickly and was even more prosperous than before. Moreover, the seal and shackles of the Five Elements world had been removed, and a true god had appeared. He was also more and more certain that the Five Elements world was definitely not a low-level world. It was very likely that it was once the main world. What made him gratified was that the current strongest person in the Five Elements world was his disciple Huanglong Daoist. This made him feel proud as well, and he was secretly proud. After calming down, he carefully pondered for a long time. There must be many reasons for such a huge change in the Five Elements world. Firstly, Yun Yao was killed back then, causing the seal of the Five Elements world to disappear, and she was successfully resurrected. Secondly, the Five Elements world had broken away from the lower planes and was brought to the god realm by him, so it had lost its shackles and restrictions. That was why it was able to expand rapidly after absorbing a huge amount of training resources and divine power. In addition, he had become one with the Five Elements world, and the two would rise and fall together. His strength increased rapidly, and so did his Five Elements world. After understanding all of this, Ji Tianxing couldn't help but think, I've just recovered to the second level of the God King realm, and the Five Elemental world has already undergone such shocking changes. When I recover to the peak of the Divine King stage, will the Five Elements world expand 5 or 6 times and become an eternal world like the Divine realm or the Dragon realm? It seemed very possible. However, if I want the Elemental world to grow faster, I have to send it more divine power and resources. Thinking of this, Ji Tianxing could not help but try. He took out 500 billion divine stones worth of training resources from his spatial ring and put them all into the heaven-mending orb. Next, the heaven-mending orb swallowed the 500 billion divine stones and turned them into endless divine power, which was poured into the Five Elements world. The moment to witness a miracle appeared. When the endless divine power merged into the Five Elements world, Ji Tianxing saw the Five Elements world grow bit by bit with his own eyes, expanding by another 10th. Not only did the Five Elements world grow in size, the training resources and various treasures it contained also appeared like bamboo shoots after the rain. This result confirmed Ji Tianxing's guess. It's just as I expected. As long as I send divine power and resources to the five elements world, it can grow quickly. Before this, I rarely took the initiative to send divine power and resources to it. I only relied on my increasing strength to drive it, and the heaven-mending orb automatically absorbing the divine power of the God realm to help it grow. Even so, it grew so quickly. If I send divine power and resources to it often in the future, it will grow even faster. Ji Tianxing and the five elements world were already one and complemented each other. Just now, he sent 500 billion divine stones worth of resources to the five elements world. Not only did the five elements world grow by 10%, even his own strength increased by a bit. Therefore, he decided to do his best to plunder training resources in the future and think of ways to strengthen the five elements world. This was not only to increase his own strength, he also wanted to see how far the five elements world could grow. Would it become an eternal world like the God realm or the Dragon realm? This matter came to a temporary conclusion. Ji Tianxing began to consider another matter. During this period of time, I used all kinds of divine abilities and secret techniques to search the entire five elements world, but I didn't find the seventh divine orb. It seems that the seventh divine orb shouldn't be in the five elements world. It's very likely that it's in the God realm. However, the God realm is so vast, asking me to find the seventh divine orb is simply looking for a needle in a haystack. However, Yao Yao's strength is improving very slowly. It's very likely that she's stuck at the peak of the divine monarch realm and can't break through to the divine king realm. I have to think of another way to help her increase her strength and reach the divine king realm as soon as possible. After all, searching for the seventh divine orb is not something that can be completed in a short period of time. Ji Tianxing thought about it and felt that there were only a few ways to help Yun Yao break through to the divine king realm. The first was to find a king-level divine pill that could help Yun Yao break through her shackles and increase her strength by a huge amount. The second was to help her refine a set of king-level divine artifacts so that she could nourish and refine the divine artifacts and comprehend and explore them. The third was to teach her king-level divine abilities so that she could comprehend and explore them. Actually, the core idea of these three methods was the same. They were all using the power of king-level divine artifacts to help Yun Yao break through her shackles. However, the first method was very difficult to achieve. Firstly, Ji Tianxing didn't have that kind of divine pill. Even if he wanted to refine it, he had to find more than 10 kinds of alchemy materials. In comparison, the third method was the simplest. Not to mention that Ji Tianxing would teach Yun Yao, she already had king-level techniques and divine abilities in her memories. However, this method was too slow. After thinking about it, Ji Tianxing still felt that the second method was more reliable. He had decided to refine a king-level divine artifact for Yun Yao. In any case, Yun Yao would definitely become a divine king soon. She would also need a suitable divine king weapon. In addition, Ji Tianxing still had a lot of refining materials left after recasting the Burial of Heaven sword. There were still 2 bottles of Galaxy Golden Sand left, half of the Black Extreme Source Cheese Quintessential Essence left, and a lot of Purple Flame Silver Threads left. However, these materials were just icing on the cake. The foundation of refining divine artifacts still required origin stones. No origin crystals that were even purer than origin stones. After making up his mind, Ji Tianxing dug out a large number of origin stones from the 5 elements world. He brought the origin stones back to the distorted spacetime and asked Yang to use his divine abilities and secret techniques to refine the origin stones into origin crystals. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 34-24. Yang obeyed Ji Tianxing's orders without question. Moreover, he did not disappoint Ji Tianxing. With the help of the Earth Golden Cloud technique, he quickly refined the mountainous pile of dawn stones into a millstone-sized dawn crystal. Compared to ordinary dawn stones, the dawn crystal was purer and contained more power. It was also more malleable. Ji Tianxing spent a month using the 9th Heaven Cauldron and the dawn crystal to refine 2 divine swords. Although these 2 divine swords were only Supreme Monarch grade divine artifacts. However, compared to the 2 divine swords that Yun Yao was using, these 2 divine swords were more perfect and had more potential. Next, Ji Tianxing performed the weapon refining technique in the distorted spacetime. He threw the 2 newly refined divine swords into the 9th Heaven Cauldron and added the Galaxy Golden Sand, the essence of the Xuanji Source Qi, the Purple Flame Silver Thread and other materials. He was going to refine 2 king-grade divine swords. It was rare to see Ji Tianxing personally refine weapons. Yang did not go into seclusion to cultivate. He just stood aside and watched quietly. After all, he and Chao Qingyu had learned a lot from watching Ji Tianqing refine the Sword of Burial of Heaven. To him it was a great opportunity to be able to watch Ji Tianqing refine divine artifacts. Yank was engrossed in watching. His eyes were fixed on Ji Tianqing's movements as he observed the changes in the ninth heaven cauldron. Since he did not want to disturb him, Ji Tianqing let him be and did not ask him to leave. Let him watch if he wanted to. How much he could learn from it depended on his own ability. Time passed quickly. Day after day passed by. The flames in the ninth heaven cauldron burned fiercely. Several sets of refining materials were smelted and integrated into the two origin crystal divine swords. As time passed, the two divine swords underwent subtle changes and their quality was constantly improving. A month later, 3 sets of king-grade weapon refining materials were completely integrated into the two divine swords. This made the divine swords materials completely sublimate and reach the lower king grade. The only thing the two swords lacked was the restriction divine formation and the divine runes of the laws that were attached to the swords. Thus, Ji Tianqing began to use a secret technique to inscribe restrictions and divine runes on the divine sword. 1 streak, 2 streaks, 3 streaks. A year later, the two origin crystal swords were engraved with more than 240 divine runes of law and more than 2,400 types of restrictions. The source crystal divine sword was already a treasure among king-grade low-grade divine artifacts. After adding over 50 law divine runes and over 500 divine formations, it would become a king-grade mediocre divine artifact. Ji Tianqing was still able to remain calm, but Yank was fascinated by the scene, full of amazement and emotion. My lord's crafting skills are simply too exquisite, too miraculous. The last time he recast the Sword of Burial of Heaven he was already fast enough. He didn't expect that this time he would take several times less time. But until now I've already observed him twice, but I still can't understand his refining technique. Just as Yank was filled with emotion, Ji Tianqing suddenly stopped casting and frowned. His brows were tightly knitted and his expression was somewhat grave. A trace of unwillingness and disappointment flashed across his eyes. Yank was stunned and looked at him in confusion. He was about to ask what was going on. At this moment the flames in the divine cauldron of 9 heavens floated, and the two divine swords floating in the flames suddenly emitted crisp cracking sounds. Yank's body shook and he immediately revealed a look of disbelief. He couldn't help but exclaim, "How can this be? The divine swords are cracking?" That's right. Cracks actually appeared on the surface of the two origin crystal swords floating in the divine fire. The blade of one of the divine swords cracked and a chopstick-long crack appeared. The hilt of the other divine sword cracked and a half-foot-long crack exploded. The two divine swords were even trembling as if they couldn't withstand some kind of force. The cracks on the surface were still expanding. Ji Tianqing sighed and murmured to himself, "Sigh, it's just as I expected. I already guessed that this would be the result. I shouldn't have thought that I would get lucky. I should have prepared the refining materials in advance. No matter how brilliant my refining technique is, I can't change the grade of the materials and forcibly superimpose more divine patterns and restrictions." Yank was originally puzzled, but when he heard his muttering he suddenly understood. "Master, you mean, the materials of the two divine swords aren't strong enough to withstand so many precepts and restrictions?" Ji Tianqing nodded and explained, "When I reforged the Sword of Burial of Heaven, I used a total of 5 sets of king-grade materials, so it could be upgraded to mid-grade king-grade. But to refine these two divine swords, I only have 3 sets of king-grade materials, so I can only refine them to low-grade king-grade. If I forcibly upgrade them to mid-grade king-grade, the materials of the divine swords won't be able to withstand it and will only collapse and explode." It was true that when he reforged the Sword of Burial of Heaven, he used a 30,000-year-old divine dragon's spine and a set of 7 fire divine gold. Yanku also furrowed his brows and asked worriedly, "My lord, did you fail this time? What should we do now?" If the refining failed, all his efforts would be in vain. Not only would the two divine swords be destroyed, but the materials and time consumed would also be wasted. Ji Tianqing shook his head and said calmly, "It's not a failure yet. I'll continue to cast spells and control the power of the 9 heavens cauldron. I can still maintain the form of the divine swords and prevent them from collapsing quickly. However, if we want to save these two swords we have to add more king-grade materials." This Yank was in a dilemma. He scratched his head and said, "But in such a hurry, where are we going to find king-grade materials? You don't have any and I don't have any in stock. How about this, you wait here and I'll go ask Chao Qingyu and his wife." As he spoke, Yank was about to leave the distorted space-time to find Chao Qingyu and Lon. Ji Tianxing hurriedly stopped him and exhorted, "Wait a moment. The couple probably didn't have any suitable refining materials in their hands. Go find Chao Qingyu and ask him where we are now. If possible, let's stop and look around to see if we can find any king-grade materials." Yank understood immediately. He nodded and said, "Okay, I understand." Previously, when they entered the Golden Dragon Abyss in the Golden Dragon domain, they obtained a huge amount of resources and mineral veins. They also obtained precious king-grade materials. Yank prayed silently, hoping that they would be lucky enough to find a treasure like the Golden Dragon Abyss nearby. Swoosh. With a flash of divine light, Yank left the distorted space-time and returned to the divine warship. He quickly rushed to the control room, asked Chao Qingyu for directions and conveyed Ji Tianxing's message. Hearing that Ji Tianxing was in trouble and urgently needed king-grade materials, Chao Qingyu also looked worried. "How's the young master? Has the situation stabilized? I only have a few sets of materials for alchemy and formation. I don't have any suitable materials for refining. We're now in the Fire Mulberry domain and we've just entered the territory of the Sanglon Empire." Yank said without hesitation, "Master guessed correctly. You poor bastard. Alright, let's stop for a while. Let's go gather some information and see where we can get king-tier materials as soon as possible." Chapter 34-25. Chao Qingyu was worried that Ji Tianxing's business would be affected, so he didn't want to waste time arguing with Yank. He steered the Azure Jade Divine Warship and continued flying south. 2 hours later, the Divine Warship crossed the vast mountains and forests and appeared in the sky above a grassland. An oval-shaped city with a radius of a few hundred miles appeared on the grassland ahead. Judging from the shape and size of the city, it should be an ancient city that had existed for thousands of years and was home to millions of Protoss. Thus, Chao Qingyu put away the Divine Warship and flew toward the city with Yank. It was early in the morning and the sun was rising from the east. The north and south gates of the city were open, and countless Protoss went in and out in an endless stream. As they approached the majestic city, Chao Qingyu and Yank used the invisibility technique to hide their figures and auras. The two of them easily blended into the city and began to gather information. They released an invisible divine sense that enveloped the entire city, listening to the sounds from all directions and asking for all kinds of information. This method was rather simple and crude but also the most practical. Compared to asking someone, it was undoubtedly faster. Of course, that was only if the people in the city were discussing relevant information. If no one mentioned which secret realm or king-level refining materials, this method wouldn't work. Fortunately, 2 hours later, Chao Qingyu and Yank found the answer. The two of them filtered out a few useful pieces of information from tens of thousands of miscellaneous information. They withdrew their divine sense at the same time and ended their investigation. They looked at each other and smiled knowingly. "You have an answer? Of course, right? Why else would you smile so lowly?" "Yank, I just don't want to waste young master's time, so I can't be bothered to argue with you. If you continue to talk nonsense, I'll have to fight you. We're at the same level anyway, so I'm not afraid of you." Fine. Let's not talk about those useless things. Let's get down to business. I've been eavesdropping for half a day and I heard that the people in the city are talking about some peerless divine craftsman Fire Dragon Mountain, and heavenly smelting divine craftsman? That's right. Chao Qingyu nodded and said with a smile, "I've also heard a few thousand pieces of news about this. I can summarize what's going on. I feel that this is really like giving a pillow when one is drowsy. Young master's matter has been settled." Yank stared at him and asked expectantly, "What's going on? What have you concluded? Tell me about it." Chao Qingyu looked at him with disdain and sneered, "Young master really overestimated your intelligence by sending you out to gather information. Forget it. I don't want to waste my time with you. I'll just go and meet young master and report the news to him." As he spoke, Chao Qingyu rushed out of the city, preparing to leave. Yank hurried to catch up with him. His face darkened with displeasure as he asked, "Who are you looking down on? Wasn't it just a competition between two divine blacksmiths? You make it sound like you're the only one who knows." Chao Qingyu hurried without looking back. He said telepathically, "Don't dawdle. If we waste another 15 minutes, young master will have 50 times more time in the divine tower." Yank thought that it made sense and did not dwell on it anymore. He could only suppress his curiosity and follow Chao Qingyu out of the city. Soon the two of them left the ancient city and returned to the divine ship. The divine ship remained invisible as it floated above the sea of clouds. Chao Qingyu and Yank entered the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Tower together to report to Ji Tianxing. Zhoush, Zhoush. The two of them entered the distorted space-time and flew toward the sacred tree as fast as they could. When the two of them arrived at the sacred tree, they saw the Jiutian cauldron, which was as big as a palace, floating in space-time. The cauldron spun slowly, and there were still 5 colored divine flames rising within it. Ji Tianxing sat cross-legged in space-time, his hands forming a seal to control the cauldron and the 2 divine swords within it. "Greetings, young master." "Greetings, master." Chao Qingyu and Yank came to Ji Tianxing's side and bowed at the same time. Ji Tianxing opened his eyes and glanced at the two of them. He said in surprise, "You have news so soon? Or, have you two not started?" Chao Qingyu smiled and said, "Young master, we did not disappoint you. We have already found some useful clues." Ji Tianxing was also interested. He smiled in surprise and said, "Tell me about it." Yank hurriedly said, "Master, we are in the Sanglon Empire of the Fire Mulberry Domain. Chao Qingyu and I found a city with more than 6 million people of the divine race. We sneaked into the city and used our divine senses to investigate the movements of the entire city. As expected, we found some useful information." At this point, Yank did not continue. He tilted his head and gave Chao Qingyu a look, indicating for him to continue. After all, he could not explain what was going to happen next. He still had to rely on Chao Qingyu. If he did not rush to say this, he might not have the chance to speak. How could Chao Qingyu not understand his intentions? A mocking smile instantly appeared on his face. However, he did not expose Yank. He cupped his hands to Ji Tianxing and reported in detail. "Young master, the news we found is like this. More than half a month ago, a young divine craftsman suddenly appeared in the Sanglon Empire and announced that he would stay in the Fire Dragon Mountain for 10 years. This person was very arrogant and called himself a peerless divine craftsman. His attainments in the art of refining had long reached the peak, and it was difficult to find a worthy opponent. He wanted to stay in the Sanglon Empire for 10 years and allow all the master craftsmen to challenge him. He would choose the most talented and potential master craftsman from the challengers to be his disciple. However, there was a divine craftsman who had been famous for 10,000 years in the Fire Mulberry region. He was known as the Heavenly Smelting Divine Craftsman. The top master craftsmen of the Fire Mulberry region, as well as several master craftsman families and sects, were all considered the disciples and students of the Heavenly Smelting Divine Craftsman. That peerless divine craftsman's actions were undoubtedly to destroy the Heavenly Smelting Divine Craftsman's reputation. Therefore, the disciples of the Heavenly Smelting Divine Craftsman went to the Fire Dragon Mountain to challenge the peerless divine craftsman. However, those master craftsmen of the Divine Lord Realm were all defeated by the peerless divine craftsman. However, they were not convinced of their loss, and even involved the face and honor of the Fire Mulberry region. They jointly requested the Heavenly Smelting Divine Craftsman to come forward and compete with the peerless divine craftsman. The Heavenly Smelting Divine Craftsman considered for a long time, but he could not resist the requests of countless master craftsmen and could only agree to fight. "I reckon that in the next few days, the Heavenly Smelting Divine Craftsman will go to the Fire Dragon Mountain and compete with the peerless divine craftsman in public." After listening to Chao Qingyu's report, Ji Tianxing frowned and thought for a moment. He said with a playful smile, "This news is indeed useful. It's really a pillow when I'm sleepy. Since it's a duel between 2 divine craftsmen, they must have king-level refining materials in their hands. That's simple. Let's also go to the Fire Dragon Mountain and borrow some materials from them." Yank was stunned for a moment and asked without hesitation, "King-level refining materials? How could they possibly borrow them?" Ji Tianxing smiled even more playfully, "They will borrow them. After all, our fists are big." Yank understood instantly and immediately grinned, revealing a fierce sneer. Chapter 34-26. Seeing that Ji Tianxing and Yank were up to no good and were about to rob someone, Chao Qingyu had a strange expression on his face. He couldn't help but wipe the sweat off his forehead. He coughed softly and reminded Ji Tianxing. Young master, that peerless divine craftsman has publicly announced that he is willing to accept the challenge of any master craftsman. If anyone can beat him in the art of crafting, he is willing to give away 3 king-level low-grade divine artifacts or the same amount of crafting materials. With your attainments in crafting, if you challenge that peerless divine craftsman, you should have a high chance of winning. Ji Tianxing was stunned. He glared at Chao Qingyu and thought to himself, damn you, why didn't you say so earlier? On the surface he laughed and said to Yank, see, I told you we can definitely borrow crafting materials. Yank nodded in agreement and said with anticipation, that's right. My lord will challenge that guy first. If he wins, he will get the crafting materials. If he loses, we will snatch them from him. In short, we must have his crafting materials. Ji Tianxing couldn't help but roll his eyes. He was speechless. Chao Qingyu was also speechless. He glanced at Yank and thought to himself, although you are right and young master does have such an idea, aren't you too straightforward? Young master didn't even have the nerve to say it, but you revealed it. Your intelligence is really worrying. The atmosphere was a little awkward. Ji Tianxing quickly changed the topic and said to Chao Qingyu, all right, this matter is settled. Let's go to Mount Fire Dragon. Yank suddenly came to his senses and said with annoyance, it's over. When I was asking around, I forgot the location of Mount Fire Dragon. Why don't I go ask around again and find out where Mount Fire Dragon is? Ji Tianxing frowned and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It's really hard for you to ask for information. Chao Qingyu couldn't help but laugh. Looking at Yank, he teased, tell me, other than being big and fierce in a fight, what other abilities do you have? Yank thought for a moment and said seriously, I'm quite resistant to beatings. I can block a blade for you at a critical moment. Well, your loyalty is commendable. Ji Tianxing praised with a smile. Chao Qingyu shook his head and said, all right, you don't have to go. I've already asked around. Young master, the Fire Dragon Mountain is located southeast of the Sanglon Empire. It's about 8 million li away from here. Ji Tianxing nodded and said, all right, then you go and pilot the divine ship. We will head to Fire Dragon Mountain now. I will comb through the divine cauldron's array formation again. When the 2 divine swords are stable, I will come out to find you. Chao Qingyu didn't say anything more. He bowed and said goodbye, then left with Yank. Ji Tianxing spent a few days combing through the 9 heavens divine cauldron's array formation and stabilizing the situation. The 2 divine swords floated in the divine cauldron. They wouldn't heal on their own, but the cracks wouldn't expand either. At least in the short term, Ji Tianxing didn't have to worry about the 2 divine swords. He left the distorted space-time and returned to the Green Jade divine ship's secret room. At this moment, Chao Qingyu and Yank were piloting the divine ship. They had been flying southeast for 4 hours and were about to reach Fire Dragon Mountain. They were still thousands of li away, but the 3 of them saw the figure of Fire Dragon Mountain high in the sky. It was a towering mountain range that was hundreds of thousands of li long. The terrain was steep and there were deep valleys and cliffs on both sides of the mountain range. Looking down from the sky, the huge mountain range looked like a divine dragon lying on the ground. The mountain range's soil and rocks were mostly dark red, and the surface was covered with lush red maple trees. As a result, the entire mountain range looked like a gigantic fire dragon. That was how the name Fire Dragon Mountain came about. But more importantly, the mountain range's soil was special, and it contained rich mineral resources. What was even more special was that there were a few huge volcanoes deep under the mountain range, and they had accumulated a huge amount of magma. The raging earth core divine flame was firmly suppressed by Fire Dragon Mountain, so it didn't erupt on the surface and cause a disaster. But this also made the temperature inside Fire Dragon Mountain extremely high. It was a treasure land with the most abundant fire elemental divine power. Fire Dragon Mountain was undoubtedly a livable place for blacksmiths and divine blacksmiths. It was extremely beneficial for cultivation and blacksmithing. Taking this opportunity, Chao Qingyu also explained the situation of the divine blacksmith to Ji Tianxing in detail. After a while, the Green Jade divine ship flew above Fire Dragon Mountain. Ji Tianxing and the other 2 looked around and saw that the highest peak of Fire Dragon Mountain was occupied by many divine ships. There were countless figures of gods moving around. And in the red maple forest, a golden palace could be vaguely seen, shining with a faint divine light. It should be there. Let's go. Ji Tianxing looked at the palace and said to Chao Qingyu. Chao Qingyu steered the divine ship and arrived above the red maple forest. There were more than a dozen divine ships hovering around, and there were more than 100 divine race members guarding the divine ships. On the ground below, in the square in front of the Golden Palace, there were dozens of divine lord experts gathered in groups of 3 to 5, whispering. Seeing an unfamiliar divine ship arrive, countless people looked up at the sky, sizing it up with interest and discussing. Whose ship is that? I don't think I've seen it before. That divine ship looks quite impressive. I wonder which empire's royal family it belongs to? Or some blacksmith grandmaster. Hee. No matter which empire's grandmaster it is, he must be here to cheer for the divine blacksmith. That's right. That white-furred divine blacksmith is arrogant and looked down on the heroes of our Fire Mulberry region. He has already angered everyone and is the public enemy of all blacksmiths. We've been waiting for half a day. Why isn't the divine blacksmith here yet? Wait a little longer. For the divine blacksmith to agree to fight, it's already giving that white-furred divine blacksmith a lot of face. Dozens of divine lord realm blacksmith grandmasters were whispering to each other. At this time Chao Qingyu put away the divine ship. Swish. With a flash of light, Ji Tianxing, Chao Qingyu and Yank appeared in the sky. Ji Tianxing walked down from the sky and landed on the square in front of the palace's entrance. Yank and Chao Qingyu followed behind him, their expressions calm and indifferent, ignoring the people around them. The surrounding blacksmith grandmasters were all dressed luxuriously and had dignified appearances. They either brought many attendants and guards, making their statuses seem extraordinary, or they gathered in groups of 3 to 5, flattering each other and talking loudly, making their statuses seem extraordinary. In short, these blacksmith grandmasters were all heroes of a region, figures that could be ranked in the top ranks in the Fire Mulberry region. In contrast, Ji Tianxing trio made everyone feel unfamiliar. Their attire was also very ordinary, and they did not have the arrogance of the crowd. Naturally, many blacksmith grandmasters sized them up a few times and lost interest in observing and inquiring. In any case, they were not famous powerhouses of the Fire Mulberry region, nor were they powerful figures of a region. Who cared who they were? Chapter 34-27. The square was bustling with people. The door of the Golden Palace was closed and there was no movement. Inside and outside the palace on both sides of the door, there was not a single guard or maid. Of course, this Golden Palace was still quite exquisite and glorious, revealing a luxurious and sacred temperament. Ji Tianxing walked to the edge of the square and came to the steps outside the palace door. Looking around, he said with a smile, "What are these Fire Mulberry region's master artificers doing here? Waiting for the heavenly smelting divine craftsman to come and watch him challenge that peerless divine craftsman?" Chao Qingyu nodded and said, "Yes. I just heard that these more than 60 refiners are all powerful experts and leaders of the various empires in the Fire Mulberry territory. Some of them just arrived today, but most of them have been here for a long time, waiting to watch the competition between the two divine craftsmen. It seems that more than half of the refiners here have challenged the heavenly smelting divine craftsman. It's just that they all lost miserably, so they are full of anger." Speaking of this, Chao Qingyu could not help but reveal a mocking smile. Yank pointed to a few groups of people on the left and said in a low voice, "Chao Qingyu, you can't generalize. Although most of them worship the heavenly smelting divine craftsman and are hostile to the white-haired divine craftsman, look at those divine craftsmen. But look at those god monarchs over there. They all want to be apprenticed to the white-furred divine craftsman. I just heard that they said it's time, and the door of the divine palace should be opening." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and asked, "What white-haired divine craftsman? Is it a title or a nickname?" Yank smacked his lips and said indifferently, "It should be the nickname that these divine craftsmen gave to the young divine craftsman." At this moment, the door of the palace suddenly creaked and opened to both sides. The dazzling noon sun passed through the door and into the hall. The divine lords who were whispering in the square immediately quieted down, their eyes focused on the door of the hall. They saw a divine clan youth wearing a snow-white cloak holding the door knocker with both hands, yawning with his head raised. Although he was tall, handsome and had a noble temperament that ordinary Protoss could not hope to match, it was obvious that he had an extraordinary background. However, his snow-white hair was fluffy and his sleepy appearance was far from noble and dignified. If he were to say that he was a lazy Daoist child who watched over the cauldron for the divine craftsman, it would definitely be believable. However, the dozens of divine emperors on the square all stared at the Daoist child. Their eyes were either filled with respect, hatred, or hostility. There was no need to ask. Ji Tianxing knew that the handsome young man in the white fur cloak was the white-furred divine craftsman they were talking about. Not only did he have a head full of white hair, but his cloak was also white and fluffy. The nickname white-haired divine craftsman was quite appropriate. Phew. The white-furred divine craftsman glanced at the people on the square, looking listless and bored. He waved his hand and said, "Today's challenge begins. Whoever wants to challenge me or become my disciple, line up and come one by one." After saying that, the white-furred divine craftsman turned around and entered the hall, walking slowly to the seat of honor. As for the Sir Gods on the square, there was an uproar immediately. The three groups of divine lords on the left, a total of 12 people, whispered to each other for a while, then immediately walked up the stairs and went straight to the door of the palace. According to the usual practice, they had to line up at the door and enter the hall to challenge the white-furred divine craftsman. As for the other 50 divine lords, most of them had already challenged him and didn't want to become his disciple, so they stayed on the square and waited for the arrival of the divine craftsman. The 12 divine lords on the left were about to reach the door of the palace. Unexpectedly, Ji Tianxing and the other two were even faster and appeared at the door in an instant. Chao Qingyu and Yank followed behind Ji Tianxing, one on the left and one on the right. Ji Tianxing walked up the stairs and was about to enter the hall to challenge the white-furred divine craftsman. When the 12 divine lords saw this, they immediately became anxious. They all looked angry and started to criticize him. "Hey, who are you? Why did you cut the line? Kid, how can you be so rude? Are you looking down on us seniors? Kid, which empire are you from? How can you be so rude? If you know what's good for you, scram to the back. We have been here for 2 days." The 12 divine lords were filled with righteous indignation. While criticizing Ji Tianxing, they also blocked his path. The door of the palace, which wasn't very wide, was blocked by 6 or 7 divine lords. The other divine lords surrounded Ji Tianxing, scolding and lecturing him. Ji Tianxing stopped in his tracks and looked around. The corners of his mouth curled up into a playful smile. The 12 divine lords were all middle-aged divine clans. There were both men and women. They were both master blacksmiths and famous seniors of the various empires. But in Ji Tianxing's eyes, they were a bunch of laughable ants. They weren't worth his attention. Before he could say anything, Yank, who was 10 feet tall, straightened his neck and sneered, "What? How dare a bunch of trash block my master's path? Do you want to die? The door of the palace opens every day. You can challenge the divine craftsman inside every day. But you have been here for 2 days and you haven't challenged him. This only shows that you are too cowardly. If you don't dare to challenge him, then scram to the side. Don't be an eyesore here." Yank's words hit the divine lords where it hurt. Their faces turned red with shame and anger. Indeed, they had been here for 2 days, but they had been watching the battle outside the door. They didn't dare to go in and challenge him. Firstly, they had heard that dozens of famous master blacksmiths had been badly beaten by the white-furred divine craftsman. They were afraid of embarrassing themselves. Secondly, most of the master blacksmiths were hostile to the white-furred divine craftsman, so they didn't dare to ask to be his disciple. If they didn't succeed and became traitors in the eyes of the master blacksmiths, they would lose more than they gained. So they hesitated for 2 days and didn't go in. But today was different. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman was about to arrive. It was said that the white-furred divine craftsman had expressed disappointment more than once in this batch of master blacksmiths. He had said in public that after the competition with the heavenly smelting divine craftsman, he wouldn't stay in Fire Dragon Mountain anymore, no matter what the result was. He wanted to go to other regions and continue to find more outstanding and talented master blacksmiths. So the 12 divine lords were anxious. Today was the deadline. If they didn't try their best, they wouldn't have a chance. Time was very tight. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman could appear at any time. But Ji Tianxing and the other two arrived last and beat them to it. How could they not be angry? Especially when Yank had a ferocious appearance and was extremely arrogant and domineering. This made them feel even more resentment towards a common enemy. "Bastard! Do you know who we are? How dare you insult us like this? Big guy, Don't think you can scare people just because you're ugly. We are all master blacksmiths of the various empires. You weren't even born when we became famous. Chapter 34:28. The 12 Sir Gods attacked Yanku and they rubbed their palms together. It seemed that if Yank offended them again they would attack him mercilessly. Unexpectedly, the 12 famous divine emperors failed to intimidate Yank. Instead Yank laughed and attacked first. "Ha! My master is noble and doesn't care about you. I didn't expect you to be so aggressive. Since you don't want to give me face then, get out of my way." Yanku suddenly roared angrily. He raised his huge palms and slammed them in all directions, creating a dazzling divine light. Bang! Bang bang bang. In an instant, a series of loud, muffled noises erupted one after another. Before the 12 Sir Gods could react, they felt their vision turn black and they were sent flying out involuntarily. Plop! Plop! Many divine emperors spat out blood and flew hundreds of feet away. They crashed on the square or fell into the red maple forest. For a moment, there were continuous sounds and the square was filled with the smell of blood. The air was quiet for a moment. The 12 monarchs of God were horrified. A few of them fainted on the spot while the others groaned in pain. As for the dozens of Sir Gods on the square, they stopped their discussions and conversations. They revealed a terrified and disbelieving expression as they stared at Yanku with their eyes wide open. No one would have thought that Zhou Xian and the other two who looked unremarkable would have such terrifying strength and means. He had injured 12 famous divine emperors with one attack. How powerful was that? For a moment, the dozens of divine emperors looked at Zhou Xian and his two companions again. Their eyes were serious and full of fear. At the same time, the divine emperors lying in the red maple forest and on the square asked the divine emperors on the square for help. "Sect Master Yi, the 3 alien races have gone too far. Please help us. Commander Lu, we are all registered disciples of Master Divine Craftsman. We must help each other. Those 3 bastards are arrogant and domineering. They are trampling on the glory of the Fire Mulberry territory and Master Divine Craftsman. We can't let them go. Prince Chen, I've brought shame to the Zisong Empire. Please save the face of the empire." The Sir Gods that were injured were the leaders of the various empires in the Fire Mulberry domain. They were also famous overlords. They were acquainted with the dozens of divine monarchs on the plaza, some shallow, some deep. Now that they had asked for help and were implicating the glory and face of the various empires in Fire Mulberry territory, it was impossible for the dozens of divine lords to remain indifferent. After only a moment of hesitation and discussion, more than 20 divine lords stepped forward and surrounded Zhou Xian and his companions indignantly. "Brat, you guys are too arrogant. This is the Fire Mulberry region and it won't tolerate your impudence. No one here knows you and you're so arrogant and domineering. You're definitely not from the Fire Mulberry region. People from other regions actually dare to behave atrociously in Fire Mulberry region and even injure so many people in public. You are all courting death. Today, if you don't give a reasonable explanation, don't even think about leaving." With someone taking the lead to make trouble, more Sir Gods followed suit. Soon more than 30 Sir Gods surrounded Zhou Xian and the other 2. They began to reprimand and denounce them. Zhou Xian looked at the Sir Gods indifferently. His eyes were cold and calm. Chao Qingyu and Yank looked indifferent as they crossed their arms in front of their chests. They didn't take the Sir Gods seriously at all. No matter how fierce the crowd was or how arrogant they weren't worried at all. At that moment, the white-haired divine craftsman was lying on the throne in the main hall. He looked like he hadn't woken up yet. Hearing the noise outside, he couldn't help but frown. He muttered with disdain, "A bunch of frogs at the bottom of a well. They don't have much knowledge and ability, but their tempers aren't small. The blacksmith grandmaster of the Fire Mulberry region is so useless. I've really wasted my time coming here. Forget it, I'll go to the Endless Forest region after today." Although it was very noisy outside, the white-haired divine craftsman was very disappointed. However, he was very lazy. He lay on the throne and took a nap. He had no intention of stopping or interfering. Anyway, he looked down on the blacksmith grandmasters. The mission given by his family couldn't be completed in the Fire Mulberry region. He was only waiting for the divine craftsman to arrive. After the blacksmith competition, he would leave the Fire Mulberry region as soon as possible. The situation at the gate was getting worse. More than 30 Sir Gods were filled with righteous indignation and were about to capture Ji Tianxing and his companions. Yank sneered again. He was about to use his thunderous means to teach the Sir Gods an unforgettable lesson. At that moment, a dazzling divine light lit up in the sky not far away. An exquisite dark gold divine worship that was thousands of feet long came as fast as a stream of light. The divine worship had a strange shape. There was a special emblem engraved on the hull, showing the identity of the divine worship's owner. Among the crowd in the square, someone shouted, "Look, the divine general is here." As soon as this was said, the noisy crowd immediately quieted down. Everyone looked up at the sky and focused on the dark gold divine worship. When they saw the divine worship's shape and emblem, everyone was overjoyed. Their eyes shone with excitement and anticipation. The divine craftsman is indeed here. Haha. The divine craftsman has arrived on time to teach that white-haired divine craftsman a lesson. There's a good show to watch. That white-haired divine craftsman is about to lose. Welcome, Lord Divine Craftsman. In the blink of an eye, dozens of Sir Gods turned and ran to the square, respectfully welcoming the divine craftsman. The area around Ji Tianxing and his companions suddenly became empty. No one cared about them. Swoosh. The dark gold divine worship descended from the sky and hovered above the square. After the divine sword's cabin door opened, a middle-aged man in a golden robe and a purple cloak walked out of the divine worship. This person was tall and had broad shoulders. He had a square face that exuded dignity. His long white hair hung behind his head and he wore a divine crown on his head. Behind him were 18 Sir Gods in silver armor. They were all wearing armor and wielding swords, acting as his bodyguards. Such a dignified display was even more solemn than the emperors of the various empires. Without a doubt, this burly man with white hair was the divine craftsman who had made a name for himself 10,000 years ago. The dozens of blacksmiths in the square had more or less received guidance and education from the divine craftsman. Everyone regarded themselves as disciples and students, and they all bowed respectfully. Student, disciple, welcomes the arrival of the divine general. Everyone shouted in unison. Rise, rise. The divine craftsman glanced at them indifferently and said calmly, "No need for formalities. Rise." Then, under the escort of many guards, he walked towards the palace gate. Seeing Ji Tianxing and the other two standing at the gate, 2 guards immediately rushed out from behind the heavenly smelting divine craftsman and shouted angrily, "The divine craftsman has arrived. Why aren't you getting out of the way?" Chapter 34-29. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman had a revered status in the Fire Mulberry region. Not only was he one of the 4 great divine kings, but he was also a famous divine craftsman. His status was very high. Even the Fire Mulberry region master and his 2 deputies had to give him some face. Not to mention his dozens of disciples and grand disciples. They were all the pillars and overlords of various empires. For nearly 10,000 years, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman had been used to tyrannical behavior in the Fire Mulberry region and enjoyed supreme honor. As a result, the guards behind him were also arrogant, domineering, and had their eyes on top of their heads. The 2 guards berated Ji Tianxing, Chao Qingyu, and Yank. Seeing that the 3 of them had no intention of dodging, they immediately pulled out their swords with a sinister smile. "Blind dogs, you're really tired of living. How dare you block the path of the divine craftsman, you're courting death." As they spoke, the 2 guards rushed towards Yank and Chao Qingyu with their swords and sabers. Seeing this scene, the dozens of master craftsmen all revealed gloating sneers, as if they were watching a good show. Especially those Sir Gods who were injured by Yank. They were worried about not being able to vent their anger and take revenge, so they had a belly full of anger and killing intent. Seeing the heavenly smelting divine craftsman's guards make a move, they were all wild with joy, revealing incomparably excited and expectant expressions. Great. With the divine craftsman's guards making a move, they're dead for sure. Ha ha ha. Daring to attack us in the Fire Mulberry region, they're simply courting death. Everyone look, they're stunned and don't dare to move. They must be scared silly by the divine craftsman's power. This is so satisfying. No matter how arrogant those 3 dogs are, they will be executed when they meet the divine craftsman. Several Sir Gods opened their eyes wide and stared at the situation without blinking. They seemed to have already seen Ji Tianxing and the other two being beaten miserably by the heavenly smelting divine craftsman, kneeling on the ground and begging for mercy. However, the next scene made the dozens of Sir Gods frown fiercely, revealing a shocked expression. He saw that Ji Tianxing and the other two did not move at all. Their expressions were indifferent as they looked at the two guards. Chao Qingyu only raised his right hand calmly and waved it casually when the two guards' swords were about to reach their heads. Boom! With a muffled explosion, the two guards were sent flying by Chao Qingyu. Moreover, both of them were vomiting blood and their chests were caved in. Before they even landed on the ground, they had already fainted from their heavy injuries. Plop! Plop! The two guards flew back dozens of feet and fell at the feet of the heavenly smelting divine craftsman, kicking up a cloud of dust before they stopped breathing. The stench of blood in the square grew thicker. The atmosphere was exceptionally quiet and strange. The dozens of Sir Gods stared at Ji Tianxing and the other two as though they had seen ghosts. It was not that they were shocked by Chao Qingyu's strength, being able to heavily injure two high-level divine lords with a casual slap. Instead, it was the attitude of Ji Tianxing and the other two that were so arrogant. They dared to injure the guards of the heavenly smelting divine craftsman. This was clearly a declaration of war against the heavenly smelting divine craftsman. As expected, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman's face was as cold as ice, and his eyes were as sharp as swords. Before he could give the order, the other 16 guards pulled out their swords and rushed out bravely. Damn bastards, how dare you behave so atrociously in the Fire Mulberry region? You're courting death. How dare you provoke the Lord Divine Craftsman? You'll definitely die. How dare you die? Angry shouts rang out. The 16 guards all waved their divine weapons and unleashed their most ferocious divine power, besieging Ji Tianxing and the other two. Everyone unleashed their divine abilities and ultimate skills, unleashing overwhelming saber light and sword shadows that poured down like a flood. Destructive divine power ripples filled the entire mountain peak, causing it to shake violently. The dozens of Sir Gods on the square were excited and full of anticipation. However, the outcome was the opposite of what they had expected. This time it was Chao Qingyu who attacked. He formed a divine art with both hands and instantly shot out dozens of sword light. Every ray of sword light was dazzling and incomparably sharp. They contained the power to destroy everything. Bang! Bang bang bang! 64 divine sword lights bloomed like lotus flowers and instantly destroyed the divine powers of the 16 guards. Then the remaining power of the 64 divine sword lights didn't dissipate and struck the guards. Even though they were all high-level divine lords, wore excellent armor and had all sorts of defensive techniques, they were still unable to withstand the attacks. But under Chao Qingyu's divine sword lights, they were like paper. The 16 people were thrown out at the same time. Their armor was broken and shattered, and their bodies were covered in blood as they screamed. Plop plop. A series of muffled sounds came one after another. The 16 guards fell around the heavenly smelting divine craftsman, causing the square to shake and dust to fly up. The air became more and more condensed and the atmosphere became extremely heavy and oppressive. More than 60 Sir Gods were shocked as they revealed looks of disbelief. The strength of that man in the green robe is actually so powerful? Too terrifying. The stone giant and the green-robed man's strength are both very strong, but they are only the white-robed youth's guards. One can imagine that white-robed youth's strength and status. This is already insulting Lord Divine Craftsman without any scruples. They are seriously arrogant to the extreme. They are dead for sure. Lord Divine Craftsman will definitely tear them to pieces. No one can save them. These thoughts flashed across the minds of many Sir Gods. Some were shocked, some were furious, and some were gloating over their misfortune. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman's expression became increasingly ugly, so gloomy that it was almost dripping water. His eyes spewed flames of fury as he stared fixedly at Yank and Chao Qingyu. His tone was frosty as he said with a cold sneer, "Very good. No wonder you all dare to behave atrociously in the Fire Mulberry region so unbridled. Turns out that there are two divine king powerhouses here." The moment these words came out, several dozen Sir Gods' bodies trembled, revealing shocked and enlightened expressions. Only then did everyone understand. No wonder Ji Tianxing trio was confident and arrogant. The severely injured Sir Gods finally understood what kind of enemy they had provoked. However, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman changed the topic and said with a sinister smile, "However, so what if the two of you are divine kings? Was he really out of control? This king will let you know that there is a world of difference between divine kings. Kneel before this king." The heavenly smelting divine craftsman roared as he raised his arms with an imposing aura. With a wide roar, he raised his palms and slapped at Chao Qingyu and Yank. He had personally taken action. Moreover, he was very confident and domineering as he used his ultimate skill to attack the two divine kings at the same time. Seeing this scene, the dozens of Sir Gods felt their blood boil as the shock and awe in their hearts dissipated. They were looking forward to seeing Chao Qingyu and Yank crushed under the heavenly smelting divine craftsman's palms. Everyone stared intently at the heavenly smelting divine craftsman, Chao Qingyu and Yank, afraid that they would miss any details. Even the white-haired divine craftsman who was lying on the seat of honor in the main hall had changed from their sleepy appearance. He opened his eyes. His gaze was clear and sharp as he looked at the door with interest and anticipation. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3430. That old man really thinks he's a piece of cake. Yank didn't care about the murderous heavenly smelting divine craftsman at all. He muttered contemptuously. Chao Qingyu also frowned and said indifferently, "He's just a low-level divine king. How dare he be so arrogant? Looks like he's been praised too much by the world and has become arrogant." As soon as he said that, Yank raised his arms and clenched his fists to meet the heavenly smelting divine craftsman. "Get lost." As Yank shouted, two fists as large as houses emitted a dazzling golden light and a violent energy that could destroy everything. The dazzling golden fist aura not only contained destructive divine power, but also hundreds of divine Dao laws. It was especially dazzling and illusory. Boom! Yank's fists hit the heavenly smelting divine craftsman's palms. Fist and palm collided, exploding with a deafening explosion that shook the heavens. The destructive shockwave mixed with thousands of divine light fragments splashed in all directions and created an earth-shattering hurricane. Even though the heavenly smelting divine craftsman used all his strength and anger and used his ultimate divine power, his combat power was unparalleled. He was still no match for Yank and was blown away on the spot. He was still in the air, but his face was already pale and blood was spurting out of his nose and mouth. There was also a cracking sound from his arms as they bent unnaturally and blood seeped through his clothes from his shoulders. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman couldn't deal with the violent impact. Not only was his body distorted, but he was also rolling in the sky. It wasn't until he was 100 miles away that he finally resolved the impact and stabilized his body. By then, the square at the top of Fire Dragon Mountain had already been destroyed by the shockwave. Even a few mountains within 100 miles were flattened by the shockwave. The dozens of divine lords were also swept away by the shockwave and were severely injured. They flew backward and fell into the ruins dozens of miles away. Dozens of people fell from the sky and landed in the ruins like dumplings, splashing dust into the air. Many people fainted on the spot. More than 30 divine lords who remained conscious were rolling on the ground as they wailed in pain. Dozens of miles of the mountain range shook endlessly. The dense red maple forest was also destroyed into dregs. It was a complete mess. Only the palace at the peak of the mountain remained undamaged. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman coughed violently, blood continuously dripping from his nose and mouth, and a piercing pain came from his broken arms. He was so ashamed and angry that his eyes were spitting fire. He glared at Yank, who was 100 miles away, wishing he could tear him to pieces. Just a moment ago he was still high and mighty, flaunting his might. However, at this moment he was in a sorry state and was heavily injured. This was a great humiliation. The god sovereigns in the ruins were also looking at him with eyes filled with shock and confusion. Everyone could not understand. The high and mighty heavenly smelting divine craftsman was actually defeated in one move? How could this be? The strength of a heavenly smelting divine craftsman was actually so weak? Many divine lords began to have doubts. Their reverence and respect for the sky-smelting divine craftsman also vanished. Seeing everyone's expressions and eyes, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman could obviously guess what they were thinking. He felt even more ashamed and angry. Today he had been swept off the altar by Yank and lost all face. With such a deep hatred he would definitely take revenge. However, The heavenly smelting divine craftsman was still able to remain calm and did not let hatred get to his head. He finally understood. Not only could the rock giant injure him, the green-robed man was also stronger than him. The mysterious white-robed youth's strength and status were even more honorable. He could definitely crush him easily. He was facing 3 divine kings and all of them were stronger than him. A wise man does not fight when the odds are against him. He decided to suppress his anger and killing intent and temporarily retreat. He had already made up his mind. After leaving Fire Dragon Mountain, he would find the territory lord of Fire Mulberry Domain to help him take revenge. You guys are ruthless. I was wrong. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman stared at Ji Tianxing and the other 2 and shouted with a sinister expression. But don't be too proud. This is the Fire Mulberry Domain after all. Let's wait and see. After throwing down these harsh words, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman turned around and was about to leave. The 30 over divine lords in the ruins were in an uproar. They all found it hard to believe. What? Lord Divine Craftsman is actually running away? How could this be? He just arrived and he's already leaving? Who are those 3 fellows? They're actually so powerful. Lord Divine Craftsman is leaving just like that? Isn't he going to compete with that white-haired divine craftsman? Many of the divine lords were filled with disappointment. Their respect and admiration for the heavenly smelting divine craftsman was further obliterated. They suddenly realized that the supreme heavenly smelting divine craftsman that they had placed on the altar was actually no different from ordinary people like them. They would still be defeated by the strong, be heavily injured, be in a sorry state and run away in humiliation. Although they were very weak and were defeated by Yank and Chao Qingyu in one move. However, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman was not any better. He was also defeated by Yank in one move. Therefore, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman was not as powerful as the legends said, nor as sacred and honorable. With this thought in mind, the reverence that the divine lords had for the heavenly smelting divine craftsman disappeared. It looked like the heavenly smelting divine craftsman was about to run away. Yank and Chao Qingyu only watched coldly as he left. They had no intention of chasing after him. Ji Tianxing stepped over the threshold and entered the hall. At this moment, the white-haired divine craftsman who was lying on the throne sat up straight. He raised his eyebrows, stared at Ji Tianxing and asked, "You want to challenge this king?" "That's right." Ji Tianxing walked toward the center of the hall and answered calmly. The white-haired divine craftsman nodded and said with a smile, "This king accepts your challenge, but can you wait a moment and let this king and the heavenly smelting divine craftsman compete first? After all, this king has waited for him for so many days before he finally mustered up the courage to come. Since I've tortured his disciples and grand disciples, I naturally have to teach him a lesson. Only then can it be considered complete, right?" Ji Tianxing stared at him and carefully sized him up. Suddenly he smiled and nodded. The white-haired divine craftsman did not waste any more time. He used his divine sense to lock onto the heavenly smelting divine craftsman in the sky and said in a playful tone, "Heavenly smelting divine craftsman, this king has waited for you here for more than 20 days. You finally mustered up the courage to come, but you're running away with your tail between your legs? Could it be that you're afraid so you asked these 3 god kings to cooperate with you so that you can avoid this king's competition?" The white-haired divine craftsman's voice was not loud, nor did it carry any anger, but it clearly spread over 100 miles. Not only did the heavenly smelting divine craftsman hear it clearly, but the dozens of god lords also heard it clearly. Instantly, the expressions of the god lords changed. Many of them revealed looks of realization. Clearly, they believed the white-haired divine craftsman's words. After all, god kings were not everywhere. Ordinary people might not even see one in their entire lives. The white-haired divine craftsman had waited here for more than 20 days. But Ji Tianxing and the other 2 had not appeared. Yet the heavenly smelting divine craftsman had come to challenge today, and Ji Tianxing and the other 2 had appeared. How could there be such a coincidence in this world? There must be a problem. Chapter 34-31. Previously, many divine lords felt that something was amiss. Where did those 3 foreign race divine kings come from? They couldn't be nameless people, so why had no one seen them before? No one knew them. What was even more coincidental was that they had arrived at the same time as the heavenly smelting divine craftsman. This was too suspicious. For a moment, Dozens of divine lords were whispering and discussing. Their gazes towards the heavenly smelting divine craftsman also became somewhat complicated. 100 miles away, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman endured the humiliation and was about to leave Fire Dragon Mountain. Hearing the white-haired divine craftsman's words and seeing the strange expressions of the divine lords, he was instantly enraged. What a huge basin of dirty water! If he did not explain clearly and did not distance himself from this, what would happen? The news would probably spread to the various empires, and millions of people would say that he, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman, was a coward. His reputation was about to be destroyed, and he would become the laughingstock of the Fire Mulberry domain. Thinking of this, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman even had the intention to kill. He was so angry that his face was ashen. Without hesitation he turned around and rushed into the palace. Bullshit. This king doesn't even know them, how can I act with them? Besides, this king's attainments in the Tao of artifact forging are known to be brilliant. Why would I be afraid of a brat like you? Although the heavenly smelting divine craftsman had just been beaten up by Yank and his injuries were quite miserable. The Tao of artifact forging was what he was best at and what he was most proud of. When it came to the Tao of artifact forging he was extremely confident and did not submit to anyone. The white-haired divine craftsman thought for a moment and nodded slightly. That's right. With your ability and methods, you won't be able to invite these 3 divine kings. You are not worthy. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman gritted his teeth in anger, but he could only endure his anger and did not dare to make a move. He walked to the middle of the hall and stood still. He glanced at Xianxia and the others, then looked at the white-haired divine craftsman and sneered. Brat, don't think that such a despicable trick can hide from this king's discerning eyes. These 3 fellows are clearly your accomplices. The reason you all joined forces to act is to use schemes and tricks to first weaken this king's strength, then provoke this king to compete with you. However, even so it was futile. In the face of absolute strength, all schemes and tricks were laughable. This king will soon show you what a true divine blacksmith is. The heavenly smelting divine craftsmen were confident that they would compete in the Tao of refining. At the same time he wanted to use this opportunity to redeem himself and regain his reputation. If he didn't seize this opportunity his reputation would be swept to the ground today, and his dignity would be completely gone. In the future when those divine lords spread the news, they would definitely criticize him behind his back. The white-furred divine craftsman chuckled coldly with disdain. You sure are a sly old thing. To think that you would try to slander me. Forget it. This prince is too lazy to argue with you. Let's see who's the real deal. Only genuine refining skills are the most convincing. Do you think this king is afraid of you? The heavenly smelting divine craftsman sneered arrogantly and asked, Tell me, how do you want to compete? A smile appeared on the white-furred divine blacksmith's face as he said in a slow and leisurely manner, All of the trash outside know about the rules that I set. No matter what grade of divine artifact you can choose as you wish. We will use cauldrons of the same grade and start refining at the same time. Whoever uses the shortest time and refines the most exquisite and perfect divine artifact will be the winner. If you win, I'll give you 3 king-grade low-grade divine artifacts or the corresponding refining materials with both hands. But if you lose, you will have to admit that you are a hypocrite who fishes for fame, a fake divine craftsman who is unworthy of his position. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman's face was as black as the bottom of a pot, and the veins on his forehead were throbbing. This is your so-called fairness? You are truly despicable. The white-furred divine craftsman raised an eyebrow. Then what do you want? The heavenly smelting divine craftsman said coldly, At least 5 divine artifacts or the corresponding refining materials. As he spoke he had already taken a divine pill to reattach his broken arms and was circulating his energy to suppress his injuries. The white-furred divine craftsman sneered. Don't forget you are the one who challenged this king, not the other way around. At most 4 divine artifacts or the corresponding materials. If you don't agree then forget it. Anyway he would not lose anything. However, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman's reputation and dignity had been severely damaged. As expected, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman frowned and thought for a while before nodding in agreement. All right then let's begin. As he spoke, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman took out a king-grade low-grade dark gold cauldron and said to the white-furred divine craftsman, "Let's use this king-grade low-grade cauldron to refine a monarch-grade divine armor. Let's see who uses the shortest time to refine a better divine armor." Clearly, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman was playing tricks. He was a lower divine king and could only refine a king-grade low-grade divine artifact at most. The white-furred divine craftsman's strength was unfathomable. He should be a middle divine king and could most likely refine a king-grade mid-grade divine artifact. This dark gold cauldron was the heavenly smelting divine craftsman's natal divine artifact, and he was very familiar with it. In the past 10,000 years, he had not had many opportunities to refine a king-grade low-grade divine artifact. In total he had only refined a dozen of them. However, he had refined more than 1,000 monarch-grade divine artifacts. He was very experienced. After all, the emperor's royal relatives and sect leaders of the various empires would ask him to refine divine artifacts for them. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman had absolute confidence that he could defeat the white-furred divine craftsman. Unexpectedly, the white-furred divine craftsman nodded without hesitation as if he did not see through his thoughts. "All right, we'll do as you say." As he spoke, he also took out a king-grade low-grade bronze cauldron. "Everyone present, please be our witnesses," the white-furred divine craftsman said and glanced at Zhi Tianxing. Zhi Tianxing nodded slightly and stood to the side with Yang and Chao Qingyu to watch the battle. The white-furred divine craftsman did not waste any more time. He carried the bronze cauldron to the left side of the hall and sat down cross-legged. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman brought the dark gold cauldron to the right side of the hall and sat down. The two of them looked at each other and sneered confidently. They shouted at the same time, "Let's begin." As they spoke, the two of them raised their hands at the same time and performed a secret art to activate the cauldron in front of them. Swish. Swish. Suddenly, the dark gold cauldron and the bronze cauldron expanded to 10 feet wide and floated in the air, slowly rotating. As the divine powers surged in, the cauldron started to burn and let out violent waves of divine powers. The white-furred divine craftsman and the heavenly smelting divine craftsman were focused on refining artifacts. Not only did Zhi Tianxing and the other two watch the battle quietly, even the dozens of divine lords outside the hall held their breaths and watched intently. It was the greatest blessing of their lives to be able to watch the battle between two divine craftsmen. They even forgot about their injuries and pain. They did not even blink, afraid that they would miss any details. Chapter 34-32. Inside the hall, including the ruins outside, it was completely silent. Everyone kept quiet and held their breath as they stared at the white-haired divine craftsman and the heavenly smelting divine craftsman. To the Sir Gods, it was a rare blessing to be able to watch the two divine craftsmen forge weapons at such a close distance. If they could learn any skills or experience from it, it would definitely be an exciting harvest. Zhi Tianxing, Chao Qingyu, and Yang were not in awe of the two divine craftsmen. They just wanted to observe their strength and forging skills. Time passed by quietly. 15 minutes passed quickly. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman and the white-haired divine craftsman both activated the arrays of the cauldron. They adjusted the divine flames to the appropriate level and put in the forging materials. Although there was a certain difference between the Supreme Monarch level armor that the two of them were going to forge, there was a big difference in the divine power attribute style and even the materials used. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman even used 13 kinds of materials, while the white-haired divine craftsman only chose 9. After the two of them put the materials into the cauldron, they focused on forging. Seeing this scene, the dozens of Sir Gods began to discuss spiritedly. Their expressions and gazes were rather complicated. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman used 13 kinds of materials, most of which we are more familiar with. It seems that he is going to forge an icicle armor. Yes. For so many years, the armor that the heavenly smelting divine craftsman has forged the most should be the icicle armor. I remember that not only more than a dozen emperors and royal family members, but also many sect leaders have asked him to customize divine armors. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman forged the icicle divine armor for those people. In that case, the icicle divine armor is the armor that the heavenly smelting divine craftsman is best at. He is very familiar with the forging process. He should be able to complete it quickly, right? Look, the white-haired divine craftsman only used 9 kinds of materials? Can he forge a supreme monarch-level divine weapon? Even if he is a divine craftsman, it should be very difficult, right? Didn't the heavenly smelting divine craftsman say that he needs at least 12 kinds of materials to successfully forge a supreme monarch-level divine weapon? At present, it seems that the heavenly smelting divine craftsman has a higher chance of winning. The white-haired divine craftsman is probably going to lose. Several dozen divine lord realm refining grandmasters were whispering to each other, all of them filled with confidence in the heavenly smelting divine craftsman. As for the white-furred divine craftsman, they were not optimistic about his chances. Instead, they were gloating over his misfortune. From the many divine lords' point of view, the white-furred divine blacksmith's actions were too arrogant and overconfident. It went against the common sense of artifact refinement. However, as time passed, the 2 divine blacksmiths' forging process went smoothly without any accidents. This made many Sir Gods more and more puzzled. They found it unbelievable. What's going on? An hour has already passed. Why hasn't the white-furred divine craftsman's furnace exploded yet? According to the rules taught by the heavenly smelting divine craftsman, the white-haired divine craftsman only used 9 kinds of materials. It's impossible for him to forge a monarch-grade divine artifact. He should have failed long ago, right? Yes. Look at that white-haired divine craftsman. He looks so calm and composed. It seems like the divine armor embryo in the cauldron has already taken shape. This doesn't make sense. Could it be that the white-furred divine blacksmith's attainments in refining weapons are too high? It's also possible that the heavenly smelting divine craftsman has been lying to us all this time. Who knows? No one can say for sure now. Let's wait and see the results. An hour passed. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman was still controlling the cauldron to forge the divine armor embryo. At this moment, the white-furred divine craftsman had already started to cast a secret technique to forge and inscribe divine patterns on the divine armor embryo. Seeing this, the dozens of Sir Gods were shocked and in disbelief. They let out a low cry. Oh my God! It's only been an hour and he has already completed more than half of it? It takes us at least a month to forge a monarch-grade divine armor. The white-furred divine craftsman has only been forging for an hour and he has already completed half of it. Could it be that he can complete it in 2 hours? It's unbelievable. When we challenged him previously, we were also forging a monarch-grade divine artifact. He only took 6 to 10 hours to complete it. Among us, the fastest would take at least half a month. From the current situation, when he accepted our challenge, he didn't use his full strength at all. It's over, it's over. If this goes on, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman will definitely lose. Even if the heavenly smelting divine craftsman loses, there's nothing strange about it. I keep feeling that the white-furred divine craftsman's artifact forging attainments are indeed much stronger than the heavenly smelting divine craftsman. Although it's a bit arbitrary, but it's possible. Many of the Sir Gods were whispering and discussing, their expressions somewhat strange. These people circulated their powers to suppress their injuries while observing the situation in the main hall. They watched with relish and were enjoying it. Xianxia trio was also observing the competition between the 2 divine craftsmen. Until now, the 3 of them had already seen through the clues and predicted the result. Without a doubt, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman's artifact forging attainments were far inferior to the white-furred divine craftsman. He would definitely lose this competition. But Xianxia saw it more clearly. He could clearly see that not only was the heavenly smelting divine craftsman's artifact forging attainments very far from the white-furred divine craftsman, there was also a huge gap in the 2's strength realm. After all, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman was only a lower divine king, while the white-furred divine craftsman was a middle divine king. In terms of artifact forging techniques, the difference between the 2 was also enormous. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman's artifact forging techniques were relatively shallow and crude, not exquisite or profound. But the white-furred divine craftsman's artifact forging techniques were extremely exquisite and concise, with the style of a great master. It was clear that he had an extraordinary background. This discovery also confirmed a certain guess in his heart. Unknowingly, another hour had passed. It had been 2 hours since the 2 divine craftsmen began their competition. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman was still refining the artifact embryo of the divine armor, repeatedly forging and refining. His expression was rather focused, but his face was as cold as ice. Beads of sweat seeped out of his forehead, and deep anxiety was hidden in the depths of his eyes. But he did not dare to relax in the slightest and continued to use his artifact forging techniques with all his might. On the other side of the main hall, the white-furred divine craftsman had already stopped. He retracted his palms and placed them flat on his knees, sitting on the spot with an indifferent expression and closing his eyes to rest. The bronze cauldron floating in front of him had long since stopped spinning, and the divine fire within the cauldron had also been extinguished. Without a doubt he had already finished his artifact forging. But seeing that the heavenly smelting divine craftsman was not done yet, he patiently waited, not in a hurry to open the cauldron. In the eyes of Ji Tianxing, Chao Qingyu and Yank, the three of them could not help but secretly nod. This was the so-called demeanor of a great master. Not arrogant or rash, confident but not arrogant, and would not embarrass his opponent. The three of them believed that the heavenly smelting divine craftsman would definitely not be able to do this. The dozens of divine lords outside the main hall also had expressions of shock and admiration, and could not help but let out a low cry. Chapter 34-33. Oh my God! The white-haired divine craftsman only used 2 hours to complete the divine armor. It's unbelievable. There's actually someone in this world who can refine a top-grade monarch divine armor in such a short time? If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I wouldn't believe it even if you beat me to death. From the looks of it, we were indeed misled by the heavenly smelting divine craftsman. That white-haired divine craftsman is the true grandmaster. Everyone, don't be happy too early. The white-haired divine craftsman hasn't opened the furnace yet. Who knows if he succeeded or not? Many Sir Gods discussed in low voices. Their expressions and emotions were very complicated. Some were gloating, some were gloomy, but there were also some who refused to admit defeat. They still believed that the heavenly smelting divine craftsman would win. After all, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman had accumulated power in the Fire Mulberry region for nearly 10,000 years. Even if he had suffered a temporary setback and his power was affected, many Sir Gods still had hopes for him. Although the heavenly smelting divine craftsman in the hall was focused on refining, he could still feel the huge pressure. From the moment the white-haired divine craftsman finished refining, his heart tightened. His expression became very ugly and the sweat on his forehead became denser. He wasn't as shallow as those Sir Gods. He didn't need to guess to know that the white-haired divine craftsman must have succeeded. It could be imagined just how those divine Lord Realm refining grandmasters outside would view him, how they would judge him. Therefore he was anxious and angry. But he was indeed a God-King expert, a veteran divine craftsman who had been famous for many years. His state of mind was very calm. Even if he was facing such a huge power, he could still remain calm and continue refining calmly. Furthermore, while he was working steadily, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman could also increase his speed appropriately. Just based on this, his strength as a God-King and more than 10,000 years of refining experience were not in vain. Everyone waited patiently as they watched the heavenly smelting divine craftsman gradually complete the steps of refining the divine armor. When he finished inscribing the divine patterns on the divine armor and successfully refined the top-grade monarch divine armor, it was already 8 hours later. In the past he would need an entire day to refine an icicle divine armor. But now he only needed 8 hours to complete it. His speed had increased threefold. This was a huge improvement and also the result of him going all out. Unfortunately, he was still far too slow compared to the white-furred divine craftsman. When the divine craftsman finished his work and completed the divine armor, the divine lords outside the hall began to whisper to each other. It's finally done. The time used by the heavenly smelting divine craftsman is 4 times that of the white-haired divine craftsman. But compared to the time that the heavenly smelting divine craftsman used to spend, he has already increased it by 3 times. In today's competition, heavenly smelting divine craftsman has gone all out. This should be his fastest speed. If there's no comparison, then there's no difference. The white-furred divine blacksmith's attainments in artifact forging are too terrifying. Everyone, don't worry. The results haven't been revealed yet. Although the heavenly smelting divine craftsman took a long time, the icicle divine armor he refined might be even better. Just as the divine lords were engaged in a heated discussion, the white-haired blacksmith opened his eyes and smiled at Ji Tianxing. "Young noble, do you have anything to say as the witness of this competition?" The heavenly smelting divine craftsman frowned as he glared at Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly, "This king saw the two divine craftsmen's artifact forging process clearly. There was indeed no problem. From the looks of it, both divine craftsmen have completed their divine armor. In terms of the time that the two of them spent, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman took a longer time and was clearly inferior. Unless his divine armor is better than his opponent's, there's no chance of a draw." Otherwise, there was no need to say the rest. Everyone understood. The white-furred divine craftsman nodded in agreement with Ji Tianxing's words. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman's face darkened as he coldly snorted. He did not say anything nor did he object. Ji Tianxing said calmly, "Since there are no problems, please reveal the godly armors that you've forged and let everyone judge." These words struck a chord in the hearts of many Sir Gods. Everyone revealed a look of anticipation as they raised their heads in anticipation. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman did not decline and waved his hand to open the dark gold cauldron. Zhoosh! With a flash of divine light, a dazzling ice blue armor flew out of the cauldron. This was the icicle divine armor that he was best at. The divine armor floated in the air, shining brightly and exuding a powerful divine power. It was clearly displayed in front of everyone's eyes. Dozens of divine lords craned their necks to take a closer look at the icicle divine armor, exclaiming and praising it from time to time. "Wow! It's indeed the icicle divine armor that Lord Divine Craftsman is best at. I've only heard of it before, but I've never seen it with my own eyes. To be able to see it with my own eyes today, it's truly exquisite. I've seen the icicle divine armor that Lord Divine Craftsman forged in the past, and it's obviously far inferior to this divine armor. This icicle divine armor is definitely Lord Divine Craftsman's pinnacle work. It's already at the peak of the monarch level. It's perfect. This is definitely a perfect masterpiece. To be able to forge such a divine armor in my life, I won't have any regrets even if I die." As expected of the Lord Divine Craftsman who has been famous in the Fire Mulberry region for 10,000 years. Once he gets serious, it's terrifying. Many divine lords were full of praises, and their faces were filled with admiration. When the heavenly smelting divine craftsman heard the crowd's praises, he calmed down a lot, and his lips curled into a confident smile. That's right, this icicle divine armor was his pinnacle work. He was confident that there wouldn't be a second monarch-level divine artifact in the world that could surpass this divine armor. The white-haired divine craftsman looked at Ji Tianxing and said calmly, "Mister, what do you think?" Ji Tianxing said calmly, "This divine armor, regardless of its defense, structure, use of materials or use of forging techniques, it's all up to standard. Among the monarch-level divine artifacts, it's considered an outstanding armor. It's really not bad." This was Ji Tianxing's true opinion. He wasn't biased and he was just speaking the truth. The white-haired divine craftsman nodded in agreement, and he believed in Sumo's words. However, when the heavenly smelting divine craftsman heard it, he couldn't help but curl his lips and he sneered mockingly. "This icicle divine armor is a perfect masterpiece among the monarch-level divine artifacts. In your mouth it's only not bad. If you say you're not in cahoots with each other, who would believe it?" The dozens of divine lords outside the hall also nodded quickly, and many of them agreed with the heavenly smelting divine craftsman. "Yeah. Such a perfect masterpiece and you say it's not bad? Kid, do you know how to appreciate divine artifacts? Is there something wrong with your eyes? That guy doesn't have a problem with his eyes. There must be something wrong with his brain. Didn't the Lord Divine Craftsman say it? He's in cahoots with the white-haired divine craftsman, and he's purposely suppressing the Lord Divine Craftsman. That kid is unknown. What right does he have to evaluate the Lord Divine Craftsman's masterpiece?" Chapter 34:34. Although the heavenly smelting divine craftsman's performance had disappointed many divine lords, but it was different now. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman had shown his true ability and made an excellent icicle divine armor. To many divine lords, this was the perfect masterpiece of a monarch-level divine artifact. Everyone praised it. So, the divine lords returned to their normal state and were respectful to the heavenly smelting divine craftsman. As a result, no one agreed with Ji Tianxing's evaluation. Many people attacked and questioned him. Ji Tianxing didn't bother to refute. He just smiled indifferently. In the eyes of the divine lords, this icicle divine armor was perfect. But in fact, in the eyes of him and the other divine lords, it was only a good work. It wasn't even a masterpiece, let alone a perfect masterpiece. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman and many divine lords were talking noisily and mocking Ji Tianxing without restraint. The white-haired divine craftsman waved his hand and said in a dignified tone, "Don't rush to a conclusion. It's not too late to make a conclusion after you evaluate my divine armor." His words were filled with confidence and indifference. As his voice fell, the bronze cauldron opened. Swoosh! A dazzling light shone and a colorful light flew out of the cauldron. Everyone's eyes were focused on the five-colored divine light. When the divine craftsman and the dozens of divine lords saw the five-colored divine light clearly, they all showed surprised, stunned, and puzzled expressions. What is this? It's a light ball? Is this a divine armor? Haha. Don't play tricks. Isn't it just condensing the divine armor into a light ball? I can do it too. Don't embarrass yourself with such a small trick. Can it compare to the icicle divine armor of Lord Divine Craftsman? Many divine emperors frowned and curled their lips, revealing expressions of contempt and disdain. But Ji Tianxing, Chao Qingyu and Yan Ku on the other hand remained calm. Their eyes even flashed with amazement. The divine craftsman's body also stiffened. His brows furrowed as the confident sneer on his face gradually froze. The white-haired divine blacksmith didn't say anything. He simply raised his hand and snapped his fingers. In the next moment, the fist-sized five-colored divine light blossomed with a dazzling light as bright as the sun, releasing a holy and majestic aura. The cluster of light bloomed like a lotus flower and spread out in the air, quickly expanding into an exquisite armor. It was a multicolored divine armor. Looked like it was made of crystal and it was sparkling and translucent. The divine armor looked natural. There were no seams, divine patterns or patterns. There were no traces of craftsmanship or carving on it either. It was as if it existed naturally. Moreover, surging divine power flowed within the translucent divine armor. It also contained the power of dozens of laws and divine formations. The white-furred divine craftsman waved a hand, and a gentle breeze swept through the air. The godly armor was immediately blown away by the breeze and drifted away in midair. Without a doubt, not only was this divine armor natural and exquisite, it was also as light as a feather. What was even more shocking was that as the white-furred divine craftsman's thoughts changed, the five-colored divine armor's appearance would also constantly change. It could expand or shrink at will, changing its appearance and shape. Not only could ordinary divine race members wear it, but even giants and rampage behemoths could wear it. Even an ant or a fly would be able to wear this godly armor. Seeing this scene, the hall was deathly silent. The divine craftsman's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. His brows were tightly knitted together and his eyes were extremely grave. The dozens of surgods outside the hall were dumbfounded and dumbfounded. Everyone's eyes were wide open, and their mouths were silently agape as they revealed expressions of disbelief. After a long while, those god lords finally came back to their senses and couldn't help exclaiming, "Heavens! How can there be such an exquisite and marvelous armor in this world? Is this still a monarch-grade divine artifact? Why do I feel that it's a king-grade divine artifact? This is unbelievable. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed that it was a monarch-grade divine armor." After living for more than 10,000 years, this old man has truly learned something today. Amazing. Simply too amazing. This is absolutely a marvelous skill. Although I'm the in-name disciple of the divine craftsman, I can't go against my conscience, let alone lie through my teeth. I have to admit that this dreamlike armor is the perfect masterpiece among monarch-grade divine artifacts. Although the dozens of god lords all had some close or distant relationship with the divine craftsman. But the two divine armors had been defeated in front of everyone. No one could lie against their conscience. Everyone had an answer in their hearts. The divine craftsman had been utterly defeated in this competition. Furthermore, it wasn't as simple as his defeat. Compared to the dreamy divine armor, the icicle divine armor was simply not worth mentioning. It was so ordinary and vulgar that it was difficult to look at like trash. For a moment the dozens of god lords were silent. Their expressions were very strange. Their eyes were filled with disappointment, sympathy, and regret as they looked at the divine craftsman. The eyes that looked at the white-haired divine craftsman were burning like fire, filled with reverence and worship. As the witness and referee, Ji Tianxing announced the result in a timely manner. Everyone has seen the result. I believe there's no need for this king to say more. Everyone has an answer in their hearts. After all, the truth is right in front of them. No one can reverse black and white. The icicle divine armor refined by the divine craftsman is indeed very ordinary, very vulgar, and not worth mentioning. Furthermore, the time the divine craftsman spent was 4 times that of his opponent. More importantly, he used 13 kinds of refining materials, while his opponent only used 9 kinds of refining materials. Perhaps you artifact refining grandmasters still don't understand the difference. But this king will tell you, only a true top-notch divine craftsman can use the simplest materials to refine the most perfect divine artifact. The divine craftsman's refining attainments and this. At this point, Ji Tianxing looked at the white-haired divine craftsman with an inquiring look. After all, he still did not know the white-haired divine craftsman's name and title. The white-haired divine craftsman smiled and said, "Just call me Heaven's Will Divine King." Ji Tianxing nodded and continued, "Compared to Heaven's Will Divine King, the divine craftsman's refining attainments are simply too appalling to look at. If the armor refined by Heaven's Will Divine King is a work of art, then the icicle divine armor refined by the divine craftsman is trash." The moment these words came out, Heaven's Will Divine King could not help laughing out loud. The divine lords outside the hall also held back their laughter, their expressions rather odd. But no one refuted. They all agreed with these words in their hearts. The divine craftsman's face instantly turned as black as the bottom of a pot. He was so angry that his entire body trembled. Unparalleled humiliation and anger made his eyes bloodshot. His entire body was suffused with dense killing intent. He glared angrily at Ji Tianxing, gnashing his teeth and shouting angrily, "Punk! Although your strength and cultivation realms surpass this king's, in terms of refining attainments, what qualifications do you have to judge this king? You humiliated this king and slandered the armor this king refined as trash. But you don't know that you are worse than trash." Chapter 34-35. Although the heavenly smelting divine blacksmith was no match for Cao Qingyu and Yank, he did not dare to fight with Ji Tianxing. However, he was, after all, a god-king expert and a renowned divine craftsman. Many of his disciples and grand-disciples, as well as master craftsmen, were present. Ji Tianxing actually belittled him as if he was worthless. How could he not be furious? It was fine to say that he was weak, but it was absolutely impossible to say that his refining skills were trash. Ji Tianxing frowned and sneered disdainfully. "Huh. Since you don't have the slightest self-awareness, then this prince will let you clearly see how big the gap between you and this prince is." With that, he was about to take out the divine cauldron and personally refine the divine artifact. The heavenly smelting divine blacksmith also sneered proudly. "This king wants to see if you can refine a divine artifact better than the icicle divine armor in 8 hours. At this moment, the Heavens Will God King suddenly raised his hand to interrupt Ji Tianxing. With a smile on his face, he said, "Young master, please calm down. This king's competition with the heavenly smelting divine craftsman has yet to end." With that said, not only was the heavenly smelting divine blacksmith stunned, the dozens of god monarchs outside the hall were also surprised and confused. What's going on? Hasn't their competition already ended? What is the white-haired divine blacksmith trying to do? He has already won against the heavenly smelting divine blacksmith. What other tricks is he trying to play? Heavens Will God King looked at the heavenly smelting divine blacksmith with a smile and asked, "Heavenly smelting divine blacksmith, you haven't forgotten our bet, right? If you win this king, you can get 4 low-grade king-level divine artifacts or the corresponding refining materials. But if you lose, you have to admit in front of everyone that you are a hypocrite who fishes for fame, a fake divine blacksmith. Don't even think about changing the topic and don't even think about going back on your word." After Heavens Will God King's reminder, everyone recalled that there was indeed such a thing. Before the competition between the 2 divine blacksmiths, Everyone had witnessed this bet. The heavenly smelting divine blacksmith's face was as black as charcoal. He was humiliated so badly that his face contorted and his entire body trembled. He glared at the heavens will God king with bloodshot eyes and asked in a low voice, "Young man, don't go too far. Do you really want to be so ruthless?" Heavens will God king sneered disapprovingly. "You think that this king is ruthless just because you lost? What if you win? In any case, you're a divine king. You can win, but you can't afford to lose. Hurry up and fulfill the bet. Don't let everyone look down on you." The heavenly smelting divine craftsman became even more ashamed and angry. He was so angry that his entire body trembled. His blood chi flowed in reverse and he almost exploded on the spot. He turned his head to look at the ruins outside the hall and saw the faces of dozens of Sir Gods. He had thought that his disciples and grand-disciples would be as angry and humiliated as he was. However, he didn't. The Sir Gods had complicated expressions. Some were waiting calmly, some were looking forward to it, and some were gloating. However, no one was angry or humiliated for him and no one spoke up to support him. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman's heart was filled with sorrow, and his dizzy mind gradually woke up. This is human nature. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman retracted his gaze and couldn't help but sneer in his heart. At this time the heavens will God king urged again. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman did not dawdle. He endured the immense humiliation and grief and closed his eyes. He said in a cold and indifferent tone, "Today this king lost to the heavens will God king. I admit defeat." The words "I'm willing to bet" and "I'm willing to admit defeat" were pronounced very heavily, and even sounded like he was gnashing his teeth. The reason why he emphasized this point was to make it clear that what he was about to say was not voluntary, but to fulfill the bet. After pausing for a moment he took a deep breath and continued, "This king is a hypocrite who fishes for fame. I am a fake divine craftsman whose virtue does not match my position." Such a simple sentence, a short 20 words, had used up all of the heavenly smelting divine craftsman's strength. When he stammered out these words, it was as if all the strength in his body had been emptied. His body instantly became bent and his aura aged and weakened to the extreme. In his life he had never been so humiliated as he was today. For nearly 10,000 years he had abused his power in the fire mulberry domain. It could be said that he could get whatever he wanted. Who would have thought that he would suffer such a huge setback today? Ruthlessly humiliated by the heavens will God king, his old face trampled on the ground, but he could not even resist or escape. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman would definitely remember today's humiliation for life. After a long while, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman gathered his courage and opened his eyes. What he saw was the heavens will God king's mocking smile, and the disdainful gazes of Xianxia trio. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman's face twitched. He hurriedly averted his gaze, not meeting their eyes. As for the dozens of divine lords outside the hall, he did not dare to look. He was afraid to see those divine lords reveal expressions of schadenfreude and ridicule. If that happened, he would definitely not be able to control his emotions and would explode on the spot. He lowered his head slightly and said in a cold tone, "Heavens will God king, this king has fulfilled the bet." The heavens will God king nodded and said, "And our competition is over. Next it is this young master's turn to challenge this king." The heavenly smelting divine craftsman frowned and said in a furious tone, "No. He has to compete with this king first. This king wants to see, what qualifications does he have to be a judge and what qualifications does he have to insult this king?" The heavens will God king could not help but sigh and said sympathetically, "Heavenly smelting divine craftsman, have you become muddle-headed from anger? As long as this young master also refines a monarch-level supreme-grade divine artifact and uses it to compete with us, won't the victor be decided? This way it will be fair and there will be no need for you and me to refine another divine artifact. It can be said to be the best of both worlds." Only then did the heavenly smelting divine craftsman realize that this was indeed the case. He suppressed his embarrassment and anger and nodded, saying, "Then let's do that." The heavens will God king ignored him. He raised his head to look at Xianxia and asked, "This young master, please refine a divine armor on the spot. If you can surpass this king, then this king will abide by the bet and give you 4 low-grade king-level divine artifacts, or the corresponding refining materials." Ji Tianxing raised his brows and asked with interest, "Oh? The challenge rules have changed? 3 divine artifacts had turned into 4? Then what if this king loses? Don't tell me I have to be like the heavenly smelting divine craftsman." Without waiting for him to finish, the Heavens Will God King waved his hand and said, "Of course not. If you lose, there won't be any punishment. Just treat it as us exchanging refining insights." With that said, Ji Tianxing, Chao Qingyu and Yank all revealed smiles. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman's body trembled and his expression became somewhat malevolent. His eyes flashed with intense anger and hatred. The Heavens Will God King's attitude towards him and Ji Tianxing was completely different. He had invisibly humiliated him once again. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman only felt his vision turn black and his mind become fuzzy. He was so angry that his chest was about to explode. If not for the fact that he wanted to see the results of Ji Tianxing's refining, he really wanted to turn and leave, immediately leaving this damned place that humiliated him to the extreme. Book Guest Residence Reading Website. Chapter 34-36. Soon Ji Tianxing began to refine. He sat cross-legged in the middle of the hall and took out the 9 heavens cauldron. Swish. Under his control, the ancient bronze cauldron expanded to the size of a water tank and floated in the air. The cauldron shone with a hazy divine light and exuded an ancient aura as though it came from ancient times. Ji Tianxing was focused as he formed a divine art with both hands and controlled the 9 heavens cauldron, activating 7 types of divine flames. The temperature in the 9 heavens cauldron rose rapidly as it exuded a majestic divine power. In just 100 breaths of time, the cauldron's temperature reached a suitable level as its aura and power were raised to the peak. Heavens Will God King and heavenly smelting divine craftsman stood on the left and right sides of the hall. The two looked at Ji Tianxing's actions and sensed the aura of the 9 heavens cauldron as they revealed completely different expressions. Heavens Will God King maintained his smile as he focused on Ji Tianxing, observing his refining techniques. His clear golden eyes were filled with surprise and curiosity. But heavenly smelting divine craftsman's expression was very gloomy as his brows furrowed. His eyes flickered with shock and resentment. As the saying goes, once an expert makes a move, the truth will be revealed. No matter how much heavenly smelting divine craftsman hated Ji Tianxing, he had to admit a fact. Ji Tianxing's refining skills were higher and his refining techniques were more exquisite and mysterious. He also had the demeanor of a grandmaster. A bad premonition arose in his heart. His heart gradually tightened and filled with worry. This damned little bastard, is he really a divine craftsman? His refining skills are higher than mine. Although the dozens of Sir Gods outside the hall couldn't understand Ji Tianxing's refining technique, they didn't know how powerful he was. But they were all refining grandmasters and knew a little. At the very least, Ji Tianxing took less time to prepare than the 2 divine craftsmen. Everyone stared at him without blinking as they discussed among themselves through telepathy. Very quickly, Ji Tianxing began to put the refining materials into the divine furnace. He took out the golden firestone, purple flame, silver thread, heavenly star sand and demon dragon tooth from his spatial ring and placed them into the divine cauldron. Fortunately, the competition was about refining a monarch-grade divine artifact. Ji Tianxing's spatial ring contained a huge amount of monarch-level resources and materials. If they competed in refining king-grade divine artifacts, he would have a headache. After all, what he lacked the most was king-level materials. Not long after, the 7 refining materials were all in place. Ji Tianxing closed the 9th heaven divine cauldron and began to concentrate on casting the artifact refining. And at this moment, Heavens Will God King's eyes widened in shock. The divine craftsman's sky-smelting divine craftsman's body trembled as his eyes widened in anger, his face filled with disbelief. Even the dozens of Sir Gods outside the grand hall could tell something was amiss. They could not help but exclaim, "Oh my God! Is that kid crazy? Am I seeing things? He actually only used 7 kinds of refining materials? Crazy! He must be crazy. He only used 7 kinds of materials and he wants to refine a supreme-grade monarch-grade divine artifact? That kid will lose for sure. He definitely won't succeed. This already goes against the common sense of refining. If he can succeed, I'll twist my head off and kick it like a ball. I thought he really had some ability and was also a divine craftsman. Didn't think that he's just a clown trying to please the crowd. Practically everyone was sneering as they transmitted their voices to discuss and mock Ji Tianxing. The divine craftsman, sky-smelting divine craftsman in the grand hall, was stunned for a moment before he also revealed a contemptuous sneer. Her. Just now when I saw him refining the artifact refining, he even gave this king a fright. Looking at it now, he's just a clown. There's nothing to fear. The divine craftsman, sky-smelting divine craftsman, also believed that Ji Tianxing was bound to fail. It was impossible for him to succeed. He already had victory in his hands and was waiting to see Ji Tianxing admit defeat dejectedly after his furnace exploded. At that time he would ruthlessly humiliate Ji Tianxing and double his revenge. The ones with the calmest reactions were Chao Qingyu and Yank. The two stood behind Ji Tianxing with indifferent expressions as they waited. No matter how others looked at them, the two of them were filled with confidence. After all, they had personally seen Ji Tianxing refine artifacts and had absolute confidence in Ji Tianxing's artifact refining attainments. This scene fell into the eyes of the heavens will divine king. He sized up Ji Tianxing with interest and thought to himself, this guy wants to amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. He wants to kill two birds with one stone. Not only does he want to trample the divine craftsman, sky-smelting divine craftsman, to death, he also wants to defeat this king in one fell swoop. Looking at the expressions of his two guards, it seems like this is already a common occurrence. From the looks of it, this king is very likely to lose. If he can defeat this king, then his identity will be obvious. Time passed. Everyone inside and outside the grand hall had their own thoughts. Ji Tianxing was not affected in the slightest. He focused on casting arts as usual and refining artifacts with all his might. In a short hour he changed 4 different artifact refining techniques. His casting speed became faster and faster. Such unparalleled artifact refining methods required an endless stream of divine power to support. It was also fortunate that his divine power was incomparably robust. That was how he could support such a high-intensity casting and artifact refining. If it were any other low-rank divine king, they would be exhausted in less than 15 minutes. Just as an hour passed, Ji Tianxing completed more than half of it. Inside the 9 heavens divine cauldron, the divine armor's artifact embryo was already stable. Following that, he started to carve the artifact embryo and inscribe divine marks and laws inside. As time passed bit by bit, everyone's hearts were in their throats. Their emotions became increasingly nervous. In a blink of an eye, it would be 2 hours in another 7 to 8 minutes. Right at this moment, Ji Tianxing finally finished his refinement. His task was complete. Zhoosh. The divine light shuttling between his palms retracted. He stopped and opened his eyes. Opening his mouth, he spat out a mouthful of turbid air. Lifting his sleeve, he wiped away the fine beads of sweat on his forehead. No matter how powerful he was, no matter how brilliant his artifact refining methods were, going all out in artifact refining this time also expended a large amount of mental and physical strength. After all, this was the fastest artifact refining he had ever done in his entire life. There was silence in the grand hall. Heaven's will divine king revealed a look of disbelief, looking at Ji Tianxing like looking at a monster. Divine craftsman Tianyi also had a dumbfounded look, staring at Ji Tianxing in disbelief. He muttered to himself, "Impossible. This is absolutely impossible." And the several dozen divine lords outside the grand hall immediately burst into an uproar after being stunned for a moment, erupting with deafening exclamations and shouts. "Oh my God! If not for seeing it with my own eyes, I simply wouldn't dare to believe that there's such a heaven-defying divine craftsman in this world. Heaven's will divine king only used 2 hours to complete the artifact refining. It's already beyond miraculous. This guy actually didn't use 2 hours. Even half an hour earlier than Heaven's will divine king. This is absolutely a miracle. Too inconceivable. What kind of heaven-defying artifact refining method does one have to be able to complete in such a short time? It's over. Just based on artifact refining speed and technique, that boy has a complete victory. Whether that boy succeeded or not, nobody knows. What are you all so agitated for? Yeah. Maybe that boy failed in artifact refining? Or maybe the divine artifact he refined is very lousy. Chapter 34-37. Most of the divine lords were shocked by Ji Tianxing's refining speed. The crowd exclaimed as they admired Ji Tianxing and predicted that he had already won against sky-smelting divine blacksmith. But there were a small number of divine lords who still held hope for sky-smelting divine blacksmith. They believed that Ji Tianxing was just bluffing and that he must have failed in refining the artifact. Even if he succeeded, it would definitely be a defective product that could not compare to sky-smelting divine blacksmith's icicle divine armor. Just as the crowd was discussing, Heaven's Will God King said, "Sir, may I know your name?" Without waiting for Ji Tianxing's reply, Chao Qingyu took the initiative to introduce, "My family's young master is Divine King Tianxing." Heaven's Will God King nodded slightly and said unhurriedly, "Everyone saw it just now. Sir Tianxing only used 7 refining materials and the time he used was also the shortest. This king used 2 hours and Sir Tianxing was faster than this king by half a minute. As such, as long as Sir Tianxing successfully refines a monarch-level supreme-grade divine armor, he will beat sky-smelting divine blacksmith. If the divine armor he refines is of similar quality to this king's illusory divine armor, then he will beat this king." Heaven's Will God King's tone and attitude were very pertinent. Many divine lords could not help but nod in agreement. But sky-smelting divine blacksmith frowned and sneered. The two of you colluded with each other and are still acting in front of this king? Even if he succeeds in refining, if the quality is inferior to this king's icicle divine armor, he will still lose. What right does he have to beat this king?" Hearing this, many divine lords frowned as they looked at sky-smelting divine blacksmith strangely. Everyone felt that sky-smelting divine blacksmith was being unreasonable. He was clearly afraid of losing and had already begun to distort the truth. Heaven's Will God King sneered contemptuously, "Sky-smelting divine blacksmith, you used 13 refining materials while he only used 7. You spent 8 hours but he didn't even spend 2 hours. To be fair, what do you have to compete with him? You actually have the face to distort the truth? Aren't you ashamed?" Being reprimanded by Heaven's Will God King in front of everyone, the sky-smelting divine craftsman was enraged and embarrassed. However, he did not dare to make a move against Heaven's Will Divine King, nor could he afford to offend Ji Tianxing. He could only stiffen his neck and say, "His pill cauldron has not been opened yet. No one knows if he has refined it or not. What are you so anxious about?" It seemed that the two of them were going to continue arguing. Ji Tianxing raised his hand and said indifferently, "There's no need to fight. Since the heavenly smelting divine craftsman still has hope in his heart, then this king will open the divine cauldron right now and let him see the truth." He paused and looked at the heavenly smelting divine craftsman mockingly. "However, before I open the cauldron, I have 2 more words to say to the heavenly smelting divine craftsman. As long as there was a competition, there had to be some sort of prize. Let's make a bet as well. Do you dare to accept?" Under Ji Tianxing's fierce gaze, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman's aura weakened a little. He was actually a little worried and hesitant. "This prince? Why did this prince make a bet with you?" The heavenly smelting divine craftsman was clearly fierce in appearance but weak in heart. He was even stuttering when he spoke. Ji Tianxing immediately sneered. Aren't you very confident in your own refining skills? Aren't you certain that this prince has failed in refining? Why, this prince didn't even mention the contents of the bet and you're going to be a coward?" Chao Qingyu and Yank immediately laughed loudly, not concealing their contempt and ridicule. The Heaven's Will Divine King also revealed a mocking smile and looked askance at the heavenly smelting divine craftsman. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman's face flushed red with shame and anger. When he heard the divine lords outside the hall whispering and discussing, he became even more ashamed and angry. "Let's bet then. Do you think this prince is afraid of you?" In a fit of anger, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman steeled his heart and agreed. "If you lose, this prince wants you to kneel in front of everyone and kowtow to this prince to admit your guilt." Although the heavenly smelting divine craftsman had already lost to the Heaven's Will Divine King, as long as he could beat Ji Tianxing, he could turn the tables. To him, this was undoubtedly the best way to redeem his face and regain his dignity. "Alright." Ji Tianxing also nodded in agreement and sneered. "If you lose, then obediently take out 4 low-grade king-grade divine artifacts or the corresponding refining materials." "What?" The heavenly smelting divine craftsman's expression changed and he growled fiercely. "You're really greedy. How can this prince have so many king-grade divine artifacts? What about the refining materials?" Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman frowned and gnashed his teeth. This prince has accumulated over 2,000 years of king-grade divine artifacts, and it's only enough to refine 3 divine artifacts. 3 king-grade divine artifacts materials. Ji Tianxing frowned and thought for a while before nodding. Alright, this prince accepts. If it's less, then so be it. It's free anyway. Pfft. The Heavens Will Divine King was drinking tea and could not help but spit out a mouthful. He looked at the heavenly smelting divine craftsman with pity and thought to himself, this heavenly smelting divine craftsman is really stupid. After being provoked by young Master Tianxing's words, he obediently fell for it. His trump card had already been revealed, but young Master Tianxing's trump card is still hidden. Other than himself, no one knows the results of his refinement. But he was so confident and easily agreed to the heavenly smelting divine craftsman's bet. Can be seen that he should have full confidence. Thinking of this, the Heavens Will Divine King could already guess the outcome. Ji Tianxing defeating the heavenly smelting divine craftsman should be a foregone conclusion. There was only one question left in his heart. Would Ji Tianxing beat him? At the same time, Chao Qingyu and Yang could not help but laugh. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman was even more furious. He was so angry that he wanted to tear Ji Tianxing to pieces. He glared angrily at Ji Tianxing and shouted in a deep voice, "Kid, stop stalling. If you have the guts, show us the divine armor you refined and let everyone see what kind of goods it is." Not only was the heavenly smelting divine craftsman impatient, the dozens of divine lords outside the hall were also impatient from waiting. Under everyone's gaze, Ji Tianxing smiled and finally waved his hand to open the 9 heavens divine cauldron. Swoosh! The lid of the divine cauldron opened and immediately, a dazzling 5-colored divine light soared into the sky, illuminating the entire hall. Amidst the dazzling 5-colored divine light, a fist-sized gray mist rose up and floated in midair. Seeing this scene, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman was stunned for a moment. Then he raised his head and laughed loudly, his expression incomparably contemptuous. "Ha! As this king expected, you little bastard deliberately mystified things. In fact, the refinement failed long ago." The many divine lords outside the hall also burst into laughter after coming back to their senses. Their expressions and eyes were full of ridicule. "Ah! To think that I thought that kid was so powerful. I didn't expect that he had been acting all along. Like I said, how can 7 materials possibly refine a monarch rank supreme grade divine armor? Turns out that his cauldron exploded long ago. It's just that he hid it very well. How can there be any miracles in this world? Just based on him, he wants to break the common sense of the refining world. There's a good show to watch now. That kid has to kowtow and apologize to Lord Divine Craftsman." Chapter 34-38. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman and the dozens of divine lords gloated and laughed contemptuously as they mocked Ji Tianxing. Only Ji Tianxing, Yang, and Chao Qingyu remained calm. God King Tianyi frowned as he stared at the gray fog in the air. He sized it up curiously and his eyes were especially bright. Looking at the gray fog floating in the air as if there was a dragon rolling in the fog, he was both shocked and curious. Unbelievable, how did he do it? At this time, Ji Tianxing saw that the heavenly smelting divine craftsman and the many divine lords were still immersed in excitement and could not help but remind them. "Is it very funny? Please open your eyes wide and look carefully." The heavenly smelting divine craftsman glanced at the gray fog and subconsciously sneered. It's just the smoke after a failed refinement. What's there to see?" However, before he could finish his words, he stopped abruptly. Because he suddenly realized that the gray fog was like a swimming dragon, condensed and did not dissipate. It kept circling in front of Ji Tianxing. That was definitely not the smoke after a cauldron explosion. Furthermore, the gray fog contained dozens of divine Dao laws and hundreds of divine array runes. All sorts of laws and array runes mixed and intertwined into wisps of smoke, changing unpredictably. To the heavenly smelting divine craftsman, not to mention fusing so many laws and runes, even if he was asked to identify each and every one of them, he could not do it. Immediately, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman was dumbfounded. He actually succeeded. That gray fog is actually the divine armor he refined? The heavenly smelting divine craftsman could not help but murmur, his tone filled with shock and disbelief. The dozens of divine lords outside the hall also quieted down. Everyone stared at the gray fog in the air, widening their magma eyes to observe carefully. Some people saw the clues and could not help but exclaim. Some people were still confused and did not know what was going on. But the heavenly smelting divine craftsman's expression was ugly and the atmosphere was strange. Everyone could guess that the outcome was not good. As expected, Ji Tianxing looked at the gray fog in front of him and said to the crowd, "This is the hidden dragon divine armor that this king refined, a supreme monarch grade armor. To be precise, this is a half-step king grade armor." The moment this was said, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman and dozens of divine lords trembled and felt even more shocked. He really succeeded in refining it. Heavens! How did the armor he refined turn into smoke? These are two completely different materials. A half-step king-grade armor? It took him less than 2 hours to make a half-step king-level armor? I don't believe it. I won't believe it even if you beat me to death. I've never heard of such a thing. 10,000 years ago or even 10,000 years later, such a thing would never happen. He must be spouting nonsense. This doesn't make any sense. Many Sir Gods were discussing in astonishment. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Heavenly smelting divine craftsman came back to his senses and was extremely agitated. He shouted fiercely, "That's impossible. Don't bluff. This king doesn't believe it." Ji Tianxing revealed a mocking smile and said, "This king expected you to have such a reaction and even deny it. Since that's the case, this king will wear this divine armor and you can attack me personally. Whether it's real or fake we'll know once we try." The moment he said that, Ji Tianxing's mind moved. Immediately, the gray fog entered his body like a swimming dragon. The next moment, his body flickered with golden light as a dark golden divine armor appeared. This armor was as thin as a piece of paper, but it completely covered his body. Even his legs and feet were covered with boots. His entire body was covered, only revealing his pitch-black eyes. Such an exquisite and gorgeous armor on Ji Tianxing's body made him look especially sacred and dignified, causing countless divine lords to feel reverence. Even Heaven's will divine king could not help but praise, as expected of a perfect masterpiece. It's completely natural without a single flaw or weakness. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman was also shocked. He had to admit that this hidden dragon divine armor had left his icicle divine armor in the dust. However, he was not convinced. He gritted his teeth and raised his fists. Using all his strength, he clenched his fists and punched at Ji Tianxing. So what if the armor looks good? It's just a flashy gimmick. This king would like to see what use this papier-mâché armor has. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman's angry roar was still reverberating in the hall. The next moment he punched out 2 resplendent golden fist auras, which had already struck Ji Tianxing. To prove the hidden dragon divine armor's powerful defense, Ji Tianxing did not dodge. Bam! A deafening muffled sound burst out, causing the entire palace to shake violently. The dozens of divine lords outside the hall subconsciously retreated, afraid that they would be injured by the shockwave. However, what was shocking and puzzling was that there was no shockwave in the hall. The 2 fist auras shattered and were swallowed by the hidden dragon divine armor. The terrifying impact was also neutralized by the hidden dragon divine armor. Ji Tianxing still stood in his original spot. His body only swayed a few times, but he did not retreat half a step. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman's punch did not cause any damage to him. Ripples appeared on the paper-thin hidden dragon divine armor. Very quickly, it regained its calm, leaving no traces behind. However, everyone discovered that the ground beneath Ji Tianxing's feet had split open into 2 ravines. The 10,000-foot mountain peak beneath everyone's feet had quietly collapsed, turning into endless powder. Fortunately, this hall was a king-level divine artifact. It was not damaged and still floated in the sky. This result shocked everyone on the spot. The dozens of divine lords stared with their eyes wide open. They opened their mouths silently, revealing looks of horror. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman was also dumbfounded. He stared at his fists in a daze, his mind in a trance. Even Heaven's will divine king revealed a look of shock. His eyes shone brightly. After a moment he was the first to regain his senses. He could not help but clap his hands and exclaim, "Wonderful! It's truly exquisite, truly marvelous. A half-step king-level divine armor has the effect of neutralizing 1,000 kilograms of force with little effort. It is not like ordinary divine armors that rely on hard materials and the power of defensive array formations to forcefully withstand attacks. It is like a living creature. Like a divine king, it can take the initiative to neutralize, absorb and divert attack power. This is definitely the most exquisite divine armor with the strongest defense below king-level divine artifacts. Heavens will divine king saw it more clearly than everyone else. He revealed the profundity of the hidden dragon divine armor with a single sentence. He was agitated and spirited. He was very impressed with Xianxia. The dozens of divine lords were also enlightened. All of them revealed looks of reverence and worship. They could not help but exclaim in admiration. As for the heavenly smelting divine craftsman, his face was ashen. He looked like he had lost his soul. His eyes also became vacant. No matter how unconvinced and indignant he was, he could only lower his head in front of the ironclad truth. Chapter 34-39. Both inside and outside the hall were noisy and bustling. However, the sky-smelting divine craftsman's limbs were ice-cold. His entire body was cold and he was trembling. Previously, he had already been crushed by Heaven's will God King and suffered immense humiliation. And now this scene was repeated once again. He was once again crushed by Xianxia. His face and dignity were like rags that were trampled on the ground. The sky-smelting divine craftsman felt that he had lost all his face today. In the past 10,000 years, the sacred and dignified image that he had created collapsed at this moment and was reduced to ashes. Outside the hall, many divine lords were cheering excitedly. Their gazes of reverence and worship towards Xianxia were the best proof. After a long while, the noisy crowd finally quieted down. Xianxia looked at the sky-smelting divine craftsman and said with a mocking smile, "Sky-smelting divine craftsman, what else do you have to say?" The sky-smelting divine craftsman lowered his head. His eyes were dim and lifeless. He said in a low and emotionless tone, "This king has nothing to say." Yank frowned and said with a look of disdain, "Since you have admitted defeat, what are you still standing there for? Hurry up and fulfill the bet. Don't think that you can avoid it by remaining silent and feigning ignorance. If you agree to a bet, you must accept defeat. If you do not hand over the prize, don't even think of walking out of this palace." Yank's attitude was rather overbearing. He stared at the sky-smelting divine craftsman warily, as though he was guarding against his escape. To the sky-smelting divine craftsman, this was undoubtedly another heavy blow and humiliation. Yet his reaction was obvious to all. Not only Heaven's will God King, even the dozens of divine lords could tell that he did not want to admit defeat. This king has been famous for 10,000 years and is renowned throughout the Fire Mulberry region. My character is obvious to all. You ugly monster, don't you dare slander this king's reputation. The sky-smelting divine craftsman glared at Yank and bellowed. Yank curled his lips in contempt and said with a sneer, "Old man, you are stalling for time so brazenly and you still say that you don't want to renege on your debt? Cut the crap and obediently take out the materials for 3 monarch-level divine artifacts. If you dare to play any tricks, I'll make sure you suffer the consequences." As he spoke, Yank twisted his neck and flexed his fists, revealing a ferocious expression. Looking at his posture, as long as the heavenly smelting divine craftsman continued to dawdle, he would personally snatch it. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman was furious and ashamed. However, he had already suffered a loss and knew how powerful Yank and Xianxia were. How could he look for trouble again? He had already been humiliated to the extreme today. If he were to be seriously injured by Yank again, it would be a complete injustice. With no other choice, he could only suppress the humiliation and pain in his heart. He took out various refining materials from his spatial ring and handed them to Xianxia. He had spent many years of effort and went through many hardships to obtain every single one of these materials. But now he had to hand it all over to Xianxia. The sky-smelting divine craftsman felt his heart bleed, and his face was as black as the bottom of a pot. He could only grit his teeth and remain silent. After a while, 21 sets of king-level refining materials were delivered to Xianxia. This king is willing to accept his loss. These materials are yours. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman said in a hoarse voice and turned to leave. Unexpectedly, Xianxia, who had been indifferent, suddenly spoke. "Wait." The heavenly smelting divine craftsman could only stop and turn to look at him. "What?" I've already given you the materials. What else do you want? Ji Tianxing looked at the 21 sets of materials floating in the air and sneered. Are you sure these are materials for 3 king-level divine artifacts? It's impossible for you to use these materials to refine 2 king-level divine artifacts. Don't play such low-level tricks with me. It won't do you any good. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman was so angry that his eyebrows twitched. That's right, he was indeed playing tricks and deliberately withheld more than 10 sets of refining materials. If he really had to take out those materials, it would have emptied his savings and made him want to cry. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman was silent and did not move. Yang and Chao Qingyu did not need Ji Tianxing's instructions. They surrounded the heavenly smelting divine craftsman and blocked his path. The atmosphere in the main hall immediately became hostile. But God King of Heavens looked on coldly and had no intention of interfering. The dozens of divine lords outside the hall could only watch, not daring to say a word. At this time, anyone who dared to say anything was courting death. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman was extremely humiliated and hesitant. In the end, reason prevailed over anger. He opened his interspatial ring with trembling hands and took out 14 more sets of king-level materials. A total of 36 sets of refining materials were handed to Ji Tianxing. It was as if all the strength in his body had been sucked out. His entire person had aged greatly, and his body had become even more crooked and miserable. All the refining materials are here. Can I leave now? The heavenly smelting divine craftsman lowered his head and did not dare to look at anyone's expression. At this time he was angry and humiliated to the point of despair, but he would not show it. It would only invite ridicule. He swore in his heart that after leaving Fire Dragon Mountain, he would ask the Domain Lord for help. No matter what, he had to kill Ji Tianxing and the other 2 to vent his anger. Of course, if possible, he wanted to kill God King of Heaven's as well. Ji Tianxing looked at the 36 sets of king-level materials and waved his hand to put them into his interspatial ring. He nodded to Chao Qingyu and Yang. The 2 returned to Ji Tianxing's side and watched the heavenly smelting divine craftsman leave. This old fellow really wants to do things the hard way. Is he asking for it? Yang watched his back as he walked out of the hall and could not help but mutter. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman stopped in his tracks but did not turn back. After taking a deep breath and suppressing his anger, he sped up and left the hall, flying into the sky. After a few breaths, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman disappeared into the sea of clouds. The inside and outside of the hall fell into silence. The dozens of god lords were hesitant, unable to advance or retreat. Logically speaking, since the heavenly smelting divine craftsman had left, they should also leave. But the battle between Ji Tianxing and God King of Heavens had yet to end, so no one was willing to leave. In addition, Ji Tianxing and God King of Heavens did not say anything, so they did not dare to leave rashly. If they angered the God King bigwigs, they would not be able to survive even if they had 10 lives. Therefore everyone could only stand where they were obediently. In the hall, God King of Heavens stared at Ji Tianxing, who was wearing golden armor, and sized him up seriously for a long time before asking, "Young Master Tianxing, you inscribed more than 80 divine Dao laws and more than 100 array runes in this hidden dragon divine armor?" "That's right." Ji Tianxing nodded. God King of Heavens asked again, "Other than being unpredictable and having super strong defense, the hidden dragon divine armor must have many other functions and uses, right?" Ji Tianxing nodded again. God King of Heavens asked again, "This king is very curious. To refine a half-step king-level divine artifact in 2 hours and inscribe so many laws and runes, how did you do it?" Chapter 3440. Towards this question Ji Tianxing smiled but did not answer. Heavens divine king raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "Forget it, this must be your secret. If you are unwilling to say, then forget it." This king was rude. Pausing for a moment, he cupped his hands towards Ji Tianxing and said in a sincere tone, "Young Master Tianxing, before meeting you, this king had always been confident in his attainments in smithing. Be it lesser divine blacksmith or medium divine blacksmith, this king rarely met a match. Until today, when I met you and saw you refine this dragon concealment divine armor with my own eyes, this king knows that there is always someone better. Your understanding of the way of smithing as well as the application of smithing techniques has broadened this king's horizons. At the same time, You have also helped this king open up a path to continue improving my smithing attainments. For today's competition, this king admits defeat and admits defeat. Furthermore, this king is sincerely convinced. In front of everyone, Heaven's Will Divine King admitted defeat with a sincere attitude. Even so, he did not feel embarrassed at all. He said he was in a good mood. Because watching Ji Tianxing refine had indeed given him inspiration. Ji Tianxing nodded and said with a smile, Heaven's Will Divine King need not be humble. Among the ancient race disciples of your generation, your smithing attainments are already very outstanding. To outsiders, this was just a polite remark to console Heaven's Will Divine King. But when Heaven's Will Divine King heard this, his body shook and he looked at Ji Tianxing with deep meaning in his eyes. He did not show any abnormalities and asked, Young Master Tianxing, do you want 4 pieces of king-grade divine artifacts or the corresponding smithing materials? Ji Tianxing said without hesitation, I still want materials. Heaven's Will Divine King revealed an as expected expression and laughed self-deprecatingly. As expected. The divine artifacts this king refines cannot enter young master's eyes. Finished speaking, he took out 42 sets of king-grade materials from his interspatial ring and placed them in front of Ji Tianxing. There were all sorts of smithing materials with strange appearances and were all rare. Each set of materials shone with a dazzling divine light and emitted powerful divine power fluctuations. Ji Tianxing didn't stand on ceremony. He waved his hand and shot out a white light, collecting all the materials into his spatial ring. Presently, he already possessed over 70 sets of equipment refinement materials, and he only needed to spend a little more time to refine 7 king-grade divine artifacts. He had already achieved his goal of coming to Fire Dragon Mountain this time, and he had gained a lot. Compared to searching for treasures in secret realms, this method was simply too fast. The dozens of divine lords outside the Grand Hall watched with their own eyes as Heaven's Will God King admitted defeat and gave Ji Tianxing the refining materials. Their anxious hearts finally settled down. They finally saw the results, and the results were within their expectations. Everyone no longer had any worries and wanted to leave. The Heaven's Will God King also spoke in a timely manner. Today's challenge is over, all of you may leave. You don't have to come again in the future. This king is very disappointed in the Fire Mulberry territory and will leave tomorrow. When the dozens of divine lords heard this, they felt a deep sense of regret and reluctance. However, they were unable to influence Heaven's Will God King's will, nor could they change the outcome. They could only leave with regret. 10 breaths later, the dozens of divine lords all left. Everyone gradually walked further and further away, still transmitting voice to discuss today's competition. The fascinating showdown of the 3 divine craftsmen let them feast their eyes, widen their horizons, and also learned many things. Inside the palace, only Heaven's Will God King and Ji Tianxing, 3 people were left. Peace was restored. Ji Tianxing was just preparing to take his leave. But the Heaven's Will God King stopped him and said, Sir Tianxing, please hold on. Ji Tianxing raised his brows and asked, Is there anything else? The Heaven's Will God King smiled faintly and said, Previously, this king guessed that Sir should be a descendant disciple of an ancient clan too. Hearing Sir's words earlier, this king became even more certain. Talking up to here, he revealed a pondering look and said while pacing, Let this king guess, Sir Tianxing is a disciple of the Raging Flame Grotto? Or from the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect? Or perhaps Sir is a disciple of the Nangong clan? Ji Tianxing raised his brows and asked with interest, How can you be certain that this king is a descendant of an ancient clan? And why would you think of the Raging Flame Grotto 100 Refinements Ancient Sect and Nangong clan? Seeing that he did not deny it, the Heaven's Will God King became even more certain and said with a faint smile, This king's talent is shallow and my knowledge is limited. Currently, I only know that there are 18 ancient clans on the continent. And among the many ancient clans, Raging Flame Grotto 100 Refinements Ancient Sect and Nangong clan are the most proficient in the Tao of artifact refinement. But this king can't be certain which clan Sir is from? The Heaven's Will God King spoke with assurance, and Ji Tianxing responded with ease. The 2 of them had outstanding demeanors, appearing rather mysterious and noble. But Chao Qingyu and Yank looked at each other, revealing a confused look, completely unable to understand what the 2 of them were talking about. Ji Tianxing stared at the Heaven's Will God King and shook his head with a faint smile. The 3 clans you mentioned have nothing to do with this king. I can't say that they are completely unrelated, There are still some interactions and grudges. The Heavens Will God King was stunned for a moment, then nodded slightly and said, if that's the case, this king's knowledge is indeed shallow. Sir's clan must be very mysterious and low-key. Is it not among the 18 clans that this king mentioned? Seeing that the Heavens Will God King was persistent and wanted to get to the bottom of the matter, Ji Tianxing hurriedly changed the topic. Heavens Will God King, if this king did not guess wrongly, your surname should be Jiang and you are from the Jiang clan, right? The Heavens Will God King's eyes widened slightly, becoming even brighter. That's right. This king, Jiang Tianyi, is the Jiang clan's 36th generation disciple, the Jiang clan's current 9th young master. How did Sir deduce this? You must have a deep relationship with the Jiang clan, right? Ji Tianxing nodded and smiled. This king and the Jiang clan can be considered to have some friendship. From your attire, hairstyle and accessories as well as your artifact refinement techniques, bloodline talent and so on, it's not hard to discern your identity as a Jiang clan disciple. The Heavens Will God King became more and more spirited when he heard that. He laughed heartily and said, in that case, Sir Tianxing is indeed an old friend of my clan. To be able to meet Sir here today and have a spar with Sir, it's truly extremely fortunate. If Sir doesn't mind, let us become sworn brothers with different surnames and help each other in the future. Without waiting for him to finish, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and interrupted him, asking with a smile, what's your relationship with Jiang Chuxing and Jiang Chuxiao? The Heavens Will God King answered without hesitation, these two are elders of my clan, my second uncle and third uncle. The smile on Ji Tianxing's face deepened and he spread his hands and said, the two of them are your uncles, then the two of us cannot become sworn brothers. Otherwise the seniority will be messed up. The Heavens Will God King was stunned and asked, Sir Tianxing, what do you mean? Ji Tianxing hesitated for a moment before opening his mouth to explain. Originally, due to certain reasons, this king cannot reveal my identity. However, this king trusts the Jiang clan, so I'll make an exception this once. Listen up, but you must not spread it out or it will bring disaster to both of us. The Heavens Will God King saw his solemn tone and nodded solemnly saying, Sir, don't worry. I'll definitely keep it a secret. Only then did Ji Tianxing relax and said with a smile, Jiang Chuxing and Jiang Chuxiao are both this king's in-name disciples. The Heavens Will God King was dumbfounded on the spot, his entire person stunned. After a long while, he recovered his senses and muttered to himself with an odd expression, if that's the case, wouldn't you become my master grandfather? This is too unbelievable. Sir Tianxing, you aren't deliberately taking advantage of me, right? The sudden secret seemed to contain a lot of information, causing the Heavens Will God King to be a little dazed. He sized up Ji Tianxing with an odd expression, unable to accept that this fellow who was younger than him was actually his master. Chapter 3441. If it were other divine kings, saying that he was Heavens Will Divine King's grandmaster. Heavens Will Divine King would have flipped out long ago. Even if he did not finish the other party off, he would beat him half to death before talking. But this sentence came from Ji Tianxing's mouth. Furthermore, Ji Tianxing's expression and tone did not seem to be teasing or joking in the slightest. Heavens Will Divine King could not tell whether it was true or false and was immediately somewhat uncertain. Although he could not accept this matter in his heart and was 80% certain that it was false. But he kept muttering in his heart, what if it was true? Thinking left and right for a long time, Heavens Will Divine King still decided to inquire clearly before talking. He looked at Ji Tianxing and asked, Young Master Tianxing, since my clan's two elders are your in-name disciples, and you even stayed in my clan for half a year, then your relationship with my clan is not shallow. I should have heard of you before, right? May I ask which clan you are from? And when did you go to my clan? Ji Tianxing had long expected that he would get to the bottom of this and did not hide it either, answering truthfully, I don't have a clan and have always been wandering the world, the four seas is my home. I went to the Jiang clan that was over 1,100 years ago. Back then, I was roaming the boundless heaven continent in order to search for pinnacle king-class materials to refine two divine artifacts. By chance, I saved your two uncles in the Starry Sky Ancient Path. They followed me to explore the Starry Sky Ancient Path and reaped bountiful rewards. They even avoided the pursuit of their enemies. Later, they learned that I was searching for a few sets of special materials and invited me to the Jiang clan as a guest, hoping to persuade the clan head to give me two sets of materials. At that time the Jiang clan encountered a crisis and was somewhat troublesome. On account of the Jiang clan treating me rather sincerely, I took action to help resolve it, temporarily delaying the Jiang clan's crisis. Hearing up to here, Heaven's Will Divine King was shocked and agitated in his heart. He could not resist nodding and saying, I've heard of the Starry Sky Ancient Path before. It's one of the continent's 10 most dangerous forbidden lands. Furthermore, the Starry Sky Ancient Path has existed since ancient times until now. It's said that it leads to a world beyond the heavens. 1,100 years ago, my clan's 3 elders indeed brought 9 Jiang clan disciples to explore the Starry Sky Ancient Path. Unfortunately, I was in close seclusion at that time and did not catch that opportunity. Otherwise, I would have been able to meet you. Ji Tianqing shook his head, smiled and said, at that time the Jiang clan sent 3 elders and 9 young disciples. But in the end, only 2 elders and 4 disciples survived. It's not necessarily a bad thing that you missed that expedition. The Heavens Will God King was taken aback for a moment before he awkwardly replied, that's true. Back then I was in seclusion. Since young Master Tianheng went to our tribe, we would definitely treat him warmly. Why haven't I heard my brothers mention you? Ji Tianqing answered, during that half a year I stayed in the Jiang clan's heaven drawing pagoda. Other than the patriarch, the protector and a few elders, almost no one else has seen me. Not. Heaven's Will Divine King was stunned for a moment. Only then did he reveal a look of realization as he said emotionally, so that's how it is. The Sky Leading Tower is the most sacred and dignified tower of our race. It's said to be our clan's cornerstone treasure that has been passed down since ancient times. But I still don't know what secrets are hidden in the top 3 levels of the Heaven Draw Tower. That's right. Back then our clan did encounter a huge crisis that nearly affected our clan's fate. Later I heard from the elders that they encountered a benefactor who helped them. There was a mysterious expert of virtue and prestige who helped them resolve the problem, allowing our clan to tide over the crisis. For the past 1,000 years, the clan leader and elders have been grateful for that benefactor's kindness, calling him our clan's benefactor. So, that mysterious benefactor was you? Talking up to here, God Will Divine King's doubts were mostly dispelled. His eyes when looking at Ji Tianqing were filled with surprise, excitement and reverence. What Ji Tianqing said just now was the Jiang clan's secret. If not for the Jiang clan's upper echelons, it was impossible to know so clearly. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said with a smile, it was nothing. Not worth mentioning. Furthermore, I helped the Jiang clan and the Jiang clan gave me 2 sets of top-notch materials. Actually, the Jiang clan doesn't owe me anything. Oh no. God Will Divine King hurriedly waved his hand and said earnestly, to young master it was nothing. But to our clan it was a huge favor. If not for your help back then our clan would have been... Forget it, let's not talk about that. Young Master Tianqing, you are the Jiang clan's benefactor and also my elder. It's my fortune to be able to meet you here today. No matter what, please come with me to the Jiang clan and let them treat you well. Ji Tianqing shook his head gently and said, the Jiang clan has already thanked me back then. You don't have to take it to heart. Furthermore, God's induction grotto heaven is too far from here. It will take at least a few months to get there. I still have other things to do. Since you can leave God's induction grotto heaven, you must be shouldering a mission as well. You shouldn't waste time. Ji Tianqing knew the Jiang clan very well. Although the Jiang clan was prosperous and had many descendants, they all lived in seclusion in God's induction grotto heaven and basically did not show their faces in the secular world. Unless the Jiang clan's elders and disciples had to carry out some mission, only then would they leave God's induction grotto heaven. God Will Divine King hurriedly explained, young master, you mustn't say that. Coming out this time, I'm indeed shouldering the mission set by the clan. I have to recruit a few young disciples for the clan and absorb some fresh blood. But this mission is seriously insignificant compared to you. If the elders in the clan knew that I met you but didn't invite you to the Jiang clan as a guest, then I would have committed a huge mistake. At that time, not only would my father beat me up, second uncle, third uncle, and the few uncles would probably give me a good beating. God Will Divine King's attitude and tone were very sincere and earnest. Even if Ji Tianqing repeatedly declined, he was stubborn from start to end, insisting on inviting Ji Tianqing to the Jiang clan as a guest. Young Master Tianqing, no matter what, I won't give up. Even if you don't go to the Jiang clan as a guest, I still want to follow you, serve you and repay you for saving the Jiang clan's life. Only then can I report back to the Jiang clan and suffer less beatings and scoldings. Young master, just take pity on little Seven. Seeing God will Divine King speak so pitifully, Chao Qingyu and Yank were dumbfounded. The two exchanged glances and could not resist discussing with voice transmissions. My goodness, this kid is a middle-level god king. He actually needs to be beaten and scolded? Hearing the situation they are talking about, that Jiang clan seems to be very powerful. If any random young disciple is a middle-level god king, then wouldn't the entire Jiang clan become a god king clan? In the past I read in ancient books that there were as many divine lords as dogs in the ancient era, and god kings were everywhere. Back then I thought it was nonsense, too exaggerated and bizarre. Looking at it now, it's our knowledge that is too shallow. Chapter 34-42. Ji Tianxing could not dissuade Heaven's Will God King. Seeing him so persistent, he could only agree for now. Forget it. I'm heading south anyway, and God's induction grotto heaven is also in the south. I'll go take a look. Seeing Ji Tianxing finally relenting, Heaven's Will God King was overjoyed and revealed a brilliant smile. Great. Thank you for your understanding, young master, for helping me. There's no time to lose. Let's set off now. Having unexpectedly picked up a master grandpa, Heaven's Will God King was very excited. He immediately wanted to leave Fire Dragon Mountain and return to God's induction grotto heaven to claim credit. After all, the Jiang clan's disciples were too outstanding. As one of the 9 most outstanding geniuses of the Jiang clan's younger generation, he actually felt a lot of pressure. Compared to the other 8 clan brothers, his talent was not the best. His divine Dao realm was not the highest. He was also not the most powerful in artifact forging and setting up arrays. Although his various abilities were very balanced, none of them were particularly outstanding. Therefore he was considered the most gentle, ordinary and mediocre among the 9 geniuses of the Jiang clan. But it was different now. He wanted to abduct this master grandpa back to the Jiang clan and make a great contribution. He could even imagine how happy and excited the clan head and elders would be when he brought the master grandpa back to God's induction grotto heaven. At that time he would definitely be rewarded by the clan head, protectors and elders, becoming the most dazzling one among the 9 geniuses. After all, the legend of the master grandpa saving the Jiang clan had been circulating in God's induction grotto heaven for thousands of years. Before long, Heaven's Will God King steered the dark golden palace and flew into the sky. That's right. This dark golden palace was not an ordinary building. It was a mid-grade king-level divine artifact. After landing on the ground, it was a low-key palace. After flying into the sky, its appearance would change and become a divine ship. Of course, the interior space of the divine ship did not change. It was still the layout of the palace. Ji Tianxing and company stayed in the palace and were not affected at all. Heaven's Will God King focused on steering the divine ship, flying south as fast as a stream of light. He was in a good mood and even could not help but hum a tune. However, he would occasionally mutter a few words, some strange thoughts flashing through his mind. I no longer have any doubts about the authenticity of this master grandpa. He knows so much about the Jiang clan and is willing to follow me back to the Jiang clan. However, he was a little too young. Could it be that his cultivation technique has the effect of rejuvenating one's youth? More than 1,000 years ago, he was already able to roam the ancient path of the starry sky and help my 2 uncles fend off foreign enemies and ensure their safe retreat. Moreover, the clan leader, protector and several elders were all extremely respectful to him and worshipped him greatly. This means that Master Grandpa is at least a high divine king. Furthermore, he's very proficient in the Tao of artifact refinement. He looks so young, but I wonder what realm his strength has reached now. His strength and aura were both very mysterious, as vast as the sea, making it impossible for others to see through him. I wonder where he is now. If he doesn't join any forces, do I have any hopes of inviting him to join the Jiang clan? Heaven's Will God King mumbled to himself along the way. After pondering for a long time, he finally decided to find an opportunity to understand Master Grandpa. In any case, Master Grandpa looked more amiable, not the kind of cold attitude that kept people 1,000 miles away. On the other side, in a side chamber of Heaven's Will Palace, Ji Tianxing, Chao Qingyu and Yank were all in a secret chamber. This secret chamber was set up with many king-level divine arrays that could isolate divine senses and all sorts of secret techniques. It was very secretive. Of course, Heaven's Will God King revered Ji Tianqing and would not casually spy on him. The secret chamber was dimly lit. Ji Tianqing sat in the middle while Chao Qingyu and Yank stood on his left and right. The two of them had a bellyful of questions. Previously, with Heaven's Will God King present, it was not convenient for them to ask. Now only the three of them were left in the secret chamber. The two of them looked at Ji Tianqing expectantly. Ji Tianqing glanced at the two of them and said calmly, "I know you must have a lot of questions. Ask whatever you want." Yank could not wait any longer and hurriedly asked, "Master, you and Heaven's Will God King are like playing riddles. What ancient clans and ancient clans? What's going on?" Chao Qingyu also hurriedly nodded and echoed, "That's right. I've lived in the boundless heaven continent for thousands of years. Why have I never heard of these?" Ji Tianqing smiled and said, "The so-called ancient clans and ancient clans are actually ancient clans that have survived from the ancient era until now. They have multiplied to become extremely powerful ancient clans. On the surface, the current situation in the boundless heaven continent is very stable. The Azura God Emperor unified the entire continent. He has more than 40 divine envoys and more than 100 domain lords under him. They are all God King experts. And below the domain lords are the various large empires and numerous divine kingdoms. But in reality, this is just the surface. The power structure of the continent is not so simple. The number of God King experts is also far more than this." Chao Qingyu and Yank both maintained silence, listening attentively. Their eyes revealed great interest. Ji Tianqing continued to explain, "Under normal circumstances, the lifespan of a God King expert is 99,000 years. 30,000 years ago was the ancient era. In the ancient era, the number of God King experts was numerous. A gathering of heroes, countless major powers. Many pinnacle God King experts established sects and clans, concealing their strength and biding their time, multiplying and gradually strengthening. These sects and clans often occupied grotto heavens and blessed lands, grasping vast amounts of cultivation resources and an excellent cultivation environment. Therefore, their descendants had excellent aptitudes and outstanding talents. It was very easy for God King experts to be born. Over time, the number of God King experts in the various large ancient clans became more and more. Their forces also became greater and greater. Of course, their control over the grotto heavens and blessed lands became firmer and firmer. Gradually, no one could replace them. Chao Qingyu could not resist asking, "Grotto heavens and blessed lands? Like the Jiang clan's god attraction Grotto Heaven? What kind of place is that? Is it like the various secret realms on the continent?" Ji Tianqing explained, "It's a little similar to the secret realms, but it's not. The so-called Grotto Heavens and blessed lands have existed since the ancient era. They are like small worlds. They are not in the God realm, but they are attached to the God realm and are connected to the God realm. Every Grotto Heavens and blessed lands have 10 times more divine power and various resources than the God realm. It is a cultivation holy land that countless forces drool over. I reckon that even the God Emperor who controls the continent would be moved." Yank scratched his head and said awkwardly, "How many Grotto Heavens and blessed lands are there? Why have I never heard of them? Could it be that my status and strength are not enough?" "That's right. You know yourself well." Ji Tianqing nodded and praised him. "As far as I know, there are 72 Grotto Heavens and 36 blessed lands on the 4 continents of the God realm. I am not sure if they have increased or decreased." Chapter 34-43. Yank paused for a moment, then asked doubtfully, "My lord, can the blessed Grotto Heavens increase or decrease in size?" Ji Tianqing nodded. "Of course. I'm not too sure how the blessed Grotto Heavens are formed. But one thing is for sure, the blessed Grotto Heavens are just small worlds, not eternal worlds like the God realm. Since it was a small world, under special and extreme circumstances, it could be damaged and destroyed. For example, back then." He wanted to say that the great battle of the gods 1,000 years ago originated from a certain grotto heaven. At that time, there were several dozen God King powerhouses who engaged in a great battle in the paradise. They caused the paradise to be riddled with holes, almost destroying it. Of course, he was one of those godly kings. And he was the target of many godly kings' attacks. However, Ji Tianqing stopped halfway through his words. It was better not to reveal this matter. Chao Qingyu was full of anticipation, waiting for Ji Tianqing to continue. Yank saw that there was nothing else, so he urged Ji Tianqing anxiously. But Ji Tianxing just smiled and said nothing. The two of them were helpless and could only suppress their doubts. Yang stared at Ji Tianxing again and asked carefully, "My lord, since you entered the ancient path of the stars more than 1100 years ago and saved the Jiang clan, then why are you here? That means you were already a top godly king expert back then. If that's the case, 1,000 years ago in the primal chaos continent, the godly king of the sword who competed with my father and uncle, was it you?" This question had been hidden in Yang's heart for far too long. There were many times when he wanted to find an opportunity to ask Ji Tianxing. Today when he heard Ji Tianxing and Ji Tianxing's conversation, he was even more certain that Ji Tianxing was the godly king of the sword. But this was still his guess. He had to get confirmation from Ji Tianxing himself. The secret room fell silent and the air froze. Yang and Chao Qingyu stared at Ji Tianxing waiting for his answer. Although this question had nothing to do with Chao Qingyu, he had a guess in his heart that was similar to Yang's. Ji Tianxing glanced at Yang and said with a faint smile, "You already have the answer in your heart. Why are you still asking me?" Yang was startled. He scratched his head and muttered, "My lord, what do you mean? You admit it?" Ji Tianxing smiled without saying anything. Yang turned to look at Chao Qingyu and asked through telepathy, "Xiao Chaozi, does the lord admit it?" Chao Qingyu couldn't help but roll his eyes and ignore him. The air was quiet again. Chao Qingyu had wanted to ask Ji Tianxing if the godly king who had enlightened him 1,000 years ago on the chaotic continent was Ji Tianxing. But Chao Qingyu had followed Ji Tianxing for so long that he was 70% sure. Now that he heard Ji Tianxing answer Yang, he had an answer in his heart. There was no need to ask anymore. It was all nonsense. But he still couldn't figure out a question. "My lord, there's a question that bothers me. I can't figure it out. 1,000 years ago you were already a high-level godly king, a top-notch expert. Why is it that you have just entered the divine king realm and are still a lower divine king?" Yang was still puzzled by Ji Tianxing's words. He didn't understand what they meant. When he heard Chao Qingyu ask such an explosive question, he immediately shifted his attention and hurriedly nodded in agreement. That's right. My lord, I can't figure it out either." Ji Tianxing revealed a meaningful smile. His entire person became unfathomable. He explained, "Actually, neither you nor Jiang Tianyi can see my cultivation level and background. But you two have followed me for a long time. You saw me break through to the second level of the godly king realm with your own eyes. So only the two of you and the people around me know my cultivation level." Chao Qingyu nodded. Yang nodded as well. "But you still haven't told me how your cultivation level regressed. Could it be that your godhead was destroyed by a stronger godly king and you had to cultivate again?" Only someone like Yan Ku, who didn't think before speaking, would be so blunt with his words. Chao Qingyu had a similar thought, but he wouldn't say it out loud. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and said with a playful smile, "Yang's explanation isn't quite accurate, but it's more or less the same." Yang and Chao Qingyu were shocked to hear this. Expressions of disbelief appeared on their faces. "Heavens! My lord, I was just saying it casually. I didn't think it was true." Yang's eyes widened in shock and excitement. "Young master, isn't this too unbelievable? Wouldn't one die if one's godhead was destroyed? How could one cultivate again?" Chao Qingyu was calmer. He thought further and still couldn't accept this explanation. Before Ji Tianxing could reply, Yang glared at Chao Qingyu and said in a low voice, "What are you talking about? Who is my lord? We followed him for so long. Don't you know how monstrous and heaven-defying he is? What is impossible for us is not a problem for the Lord. Let's not talk about the Lord recultivating. Even if he was reborn, I would still believe it." Chao Qingyu rolled his eyes again and sneered, "Only a pig brain like you would believe in reincarnation. Do you think the 6 realms of reincarnation are fake? Do you think the heavenly laws are just for show?" Yang stubbornly straightened his neck and said in a firm tone, "I don't care about reincarnation or laws. I believe that there's nothing my lord can't do." Chao Qingyu was speechless. The atmosphere suddenly became quiet and it was a little awkward. Chao Qingyu frowned and thought for a moment. Then he sneered, "Hey Yang, I've always thought that you were a blockhead. I didn't expect you to suddenly be enlightened. Your flattery is smooth. You're showing your true feelings." Seeing that the two were about to quarrel again, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and interrupted them. "Quiet. This topic ends here. You must keep it a secret. When we reach the Jiang clan, you must not speak carelessly. That's an ancient clan with many godly kings. If you cause any trouble, you can imagine the consequences. Chao Qingyu and Yang's expressions were solemn. They hurriedly nodded to show that they understood. Please don't worry, young master. Qingyu knows what to do. Don't worry, my lord. I will not speak carelessly. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said, all right, if you have nothing else, go cultivate in seclusion. After that, he took out the Jutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda and put Yang into the distorted spacetime. Chao Qingyu was not in a hurry to enter his divine worship. Suddenly he thought of something and asked worriedly, young master, the Jiang clan must have a high-level godly king, right? With your strength and methods, low-level and mid-level godly kings can't see through you. But if you meet a high-level godly king and they see through you, how will you explain it? Ji Tianqing waved his hand and revealed a mysterious smile. He said in a strange tone, since I dare to go to the Jiang clan, I naturally have my ways and countermeasures. Jiang Tianyi is still intoxicated. He's fantasizing about how he will be rewarded if he brings me back. Poor child, just don't cry in the future. Chapter 34-44. Ji Tianqing's words stunned Chao Qingyu. Moreover, Ji Tianqing's face was full of smiles. It was especially teasing and meaningful. Chao Qingyu could not help but feel a chill down his spine. He asked worriedly, young master, do you have a grudge with the Jiang clan? Ji Tianqing glanced at him and asked, if I had a grudge, why would I bring you to the Jiang clan? Wouldn't I be walking right into their trap? Chao Qingyu was stunned. He was confused. What did you mean just now? Nothing. Don't think too much. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said, go and cultivate in seclusion. Seeing that he was unwilling to answer, Chao Qingyu was helpless. He could only give up. He bid farewell to Ji Tianqing and returned to the Green Jade Divine Worship to cultivate in seclusion. Ji Tianqing placed the Jiotian 10 Absolutes Tower and the Green Jade Divine Worship on the stone table in the secret chamber. However, he also returned to the distorted spacetime of the Divine Tower to continue crafting divine artifacts. Swoosh. When he returned to the Bloody Flame Sacred Tree, Yang had already entered a state of cultivation. Ji Tianqing flew to the Jutian cauldron and connected his mind to the cauldron to check the situation inside. Although he had left the distorted spacetime and went to the Fire Dragon Mountain, he had wasted a lot of time. Fortunately, the array of the cauldron was working normally. The two divine swords in the cauldron were still intact. However, the cracks on the surface of the two divine swords had widened and they were trembling even more violently. Seeing this, Ji Tianqing took out more than 70 sets of king-level crafting materials from his infinite space ring and arranged them in the air. I didn't expect to get so many king-level materials from just one trip to the Fire Dragon Mountain. This is much more efficient than exploring secret realms and treasure hunting. With these materials I can craft a king-level divine artifact for Ku Wushuang and Bai Long each. In the future, when I go to the Divine Attraction Grotto Heaven, I have to get more top-notch materials in case I need them. Ji Tianqing muttered to himself. The scene of the Divine Attraction Grotto Heaven appeared in his mind. He also thought of the few rare treasures and looked forward to it. Soon he picked out 3 sets of materials from the 70 sets and added them to the cauldron. These 3 sets of refining materials were all rare metals. They were extremely tough and malleable. Ji Tianqing's goal was to strengthen the two swords' toughness and they could withstand more laws and restrictions. As expected, after adding 3 sets of materials, the cracks on the swords' back. Next, San Tianqing's the 3 materials. Only when the quality and strength of the divine sword was guaranteed did he feel at ease to inscribe the laws and restrictions. Time. Unknowingly 3 months. More and use. More. You. Finally, the number of laws on the swords reached 300 and the number of restrictions reached 3,000. Without a doubt, the 2 mid-grade king-level swords had been refined. When Ji Tianqing stopped and opened the 9th heaven cauldron, 2 dazzling sword lights shot into the sky. Swoosh, swoosh. The 2 swords flew into the sky, dragging long tails of flames. They were like 2 divine dragons circling in the sky. Hundreds of millions of sword lights flashed like stars. The vast and mighty divine sword chi fell like a downpour. The space-time was affected by the sword chi and started to fluctuate. Ji Tianqing looked up at the 2 divine swords that were dancing in the air and revealed a gratified smile. With these 2 swords, Yao Yao's combat power will increase by several times. Moreover, the sword's attributes and laws are very compatible with her. I'll call these two swords the sun and moon swords for now. Indeed, of the two swords flying in the sky, one was as golden as the sun, and the other was as silver as the moon. Even the aura emitted by the two swords was. One was blazing and violent while the other was cold and restrained. After a while, when the aura of the two swords stabilized, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and put them away. Originally, he wanted to use this opportunity to refine another king-level divine spear for Ji Ku. But he calculated the time. 2.5 days had passed outside. Therefore, he left the distorted space-time and returned to the secret room in the Heavens Will Divine Palace. He opened the secret room and walked into the hall of the Divine Palace. There were many divine arrays in the hall. Among them, there was an array that controlled the flight of the Divine Palace. In these few days, Heavens Will Divine King sat cross-legged in the hall and focused on controlling the Divine Palace. The moment Ji Tianxing walked into the hall, Heavens Will Divine King was startled awake. He hurriedly asked, "Young Master Tianxing, why aren't you recuperating? From here to God's Guide Grotto Heaven, we still have to pass through more than 20 domains. It will take at least half a year. You can go into seclusion and cultivate." Ji Tianxing nodded and asked, "Where are we now? Have we left Sanglon Empire?" Heavens Will Divine King thought for a moment and answered, "Currently we are already at the southernmost part of Sanglon Empire. We will reach the border in another hour. After passing Sanglon Empire's border, we will enter Fire Mulberry Empire." Ji Tianxing's eyes narrowed slightly and asked, "Fire Mulberry Empire is located in the middle of Fire Mulberry region. It is the core empire of Fire Mulberry region, right?" "That is of course." Heavens Will Divine King nodded without hesitation. Ji Tianxing asked again, "Heavens Will, how much do you know about Fire Mulberry region and Fire Mulberry Empire? How many Divine King experts are there in the entire region? How many High Divine Lords are there in Fire Mulberry Empire?" Heavens Will Divine King answered without hesitation, "Although I have not been in Fire Mulberry region for long, I have only stayed for slightly more than a month. But I have investigated the situation beforehand. I have some understanding of Fire Mulberry region. Otherwise, I would not recruit disciples here. In the nearby 10 regions, Fire Mulberry region's faction is the strongest. This region has 4 divine kings. Other than the heavenly smelting divine craftsman, Fire Mulberry region lord has 2 deputies. Fire Mulberry region lord is called Bai Feng. His 2 deputies are a pair of Dao companions called Qin Yi and Wuxia. That's right, that Bai Feng has some background. He is a high divine king who has been famous for 20,000 years. His strength has reached the 7th stage realm. Furthermore, he seems to have the bloodline of the divine beast Fire Phoenix. He has the mysterious annihilation divine eyes. He can predict good and bad luck and calculate heaven's secrets. Most importantly, I heard that he seems to have the shadow of divine Phoenix Grotto Heaven behind him. But I don't know if it is true or false. Anyway, I do not wish to interact with him, so I did not continue investigating." When he heard this, Ji Tianxing frowned slightly. His eyes were grave. He thought in his heart, Jing Feihong was killed. Golden Dragon Region Lord was exiled to the void. Stellar Aspect Divine Envoy also escaped with heavy injuries. Stellar Aspect Divine Envoy definitely hates me to the bone and will not let this matter rest. Even if he is heavily injured, he cannot chase after me. But with his identity, he should find other divine envoys to help and inform the various regions to intercept and kill me. Bai Feng's strength is so robust. He also has the relationship with Divine Phoenix Grotto Heaven behind him. If I were Stellar Aspect Divine Envoy, I would probably find him for help too, right? Pausing for a moment, his pupils suddenly constricted. He muttered to himself, "Annihilation Divine Eyes? Can predict good and bad luck and calculate heaven's secrets." Chapter 3445. Originally, Heavens Will Divine King and Ji Tianxing were chatting rather normally. Talking about the White Phoenix Divine King and the Divine Phoenix Grotto Heaven, Ji Tianxing fell into deep thought, his eyes solemn. Heavens Will Divine King detected his odd expression and asked in concern, "Young Master Tianxing, what's wrong with you? Is there a problem?" Ji Tianxing came back to his senses and waved his hand and said, "Nothing, don't worry. However, after entering the Fire Mulberry Empire, try your best to be more careful." "No problem." Heavens Will Divine King nodded his head in agreement, but asked worriedly, Young Master Tianxing, did you offend the White Phoenix Divine King before? Or do you have some grudge with the Divine Phoenix Grotto Heaven? Ji Tianxing thought to himself, if Divine Envoy Stellar Aspect really sent a message to the White Phoenix Divine King, he'll definitely make a move to help. He's the Fire Mulberry Domain Lord after all, the Azura God Emperor's subordinate. He naturally has to follow orders. As for the Divine Phoenix Grotto Heaven, back then in order to temper my sword Dao I broke through in a crisis. And also in order to find materials from the Grotto Heavens and Blessed Lands to refine all kinds of divine weapons, I trampled over the 72 Grotto Heavens and 36 Blessed Lands one by one. That old Fire Phoenix definitely hates me until he gnashes his teeth in hatred, right? Although he thought so in his heart, Ji Tianxing pretended to be nonchalant on the surface and explained to Heaven's Will Divine King, what grudge can I have with the Divine Phoenix Grotto Heaven? Rather, the White Phoenix Divine King might have been offended. After all, I trampled on the heavenly smelting divine craftsman at Fire Dragon Mountain, making his face sweep to the ground, his prestige completely wiped out. I even won over 30 sets of king-rank materials from him. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman was almost driven mad with anger. He definitely has a deep relationship with the White Phoenix Divine King. The White Phoenix Divine King might very well take action against me for the sake of the Fire Mulberry region's face. Heaven's Will Divine King thought about it and said with a nod, so that's how it is. Your worries aren't without reason. With the heavenly smelting divine craftsman's vengeful nature, he'll most likely find the White Phoenix Divine King for help. However, with your strength and means, what does a mere heavenly smelting divine craftsman count as? Even if the White Phoenix Divine King, you won't think much of it either. Although Heaven's Will God King could not see through Ji Tianxing's cultivation realm and background, Heaven's Will God King could not see through him. However, he firmly believed that this was because Ji Tianxing's cultivation level was too high. Moreover, the entire Jiang clan was in awe of Ji Tianxing. One could imagine that Ji Tianxing was absolutely a high-ranking divine king. Moreover, he was one of the best among the high-level god kings and 8th or 9th stage god king. With such formidable strength, wouldn't they still do as they pleased in the boundless heaven continent? However, Heaven's Will God King was quick-witted as he hurriedly smiled and said, Young Master Tianxing, don't worry. Don't say that Divine King White Phoenix isn't your match. With me present, Divine King White Phoenix definitely won't dare to make things difficult for you. After all, our Jiang clan and the Divine Phoenix Grotto Heaven are both clans that are on par with each other. Divine King White Phoenix will definitely give me face. When the time comes, you don't have to worry about anything. I'll handle it. Heaven's Will God King guaranteed rather confidently. It was also in order to perform in front of Ji Tianxing so as to pull the relationship closer. Ji Tianxing knew what he was thinking. He just smiled and didn't say anything. Alright, then you focus on steering the divine ship. I'll go to the hidden chamber to recuperate for a while. Finished talking, Ji Tianxing patted Heaven's Will God King's shoulder, turned around and left. Returning to 2.5 days ago, Ji Tianxing won the Heavenly Smelting Divine Craftsman at Fire Dragon Mountain Summit and obtained over 30 sets of king-rank materials. The Heavenly Smelting Divine Craftsman swallowed his anger and humiliation, carrying monstrous hatred and extreme humiliation, and left Fire Dragon Mountain in a sorry state. Not long after leaving Fire Dragon Mountain, he took out a transmission jade slip and sought help from the White Phoenix Divine King. Normally, his relationship with the White Phoenix Divine King was pretty good and also helped the White Phoenix refine many king-rank divine artifacts. Furthermore, the various major empires' royal families and powerhouses also frequently had requests for him. The Heavenly Smelting Divine Craftsman believed that the White Phoenix Divine King would definitely help him take revenge. He explained everything that had happened in detail in his communication jade slip. After sending the message, he accelerated toward the Fire Mulberry Empire. 15 minutes later. At the northern border of the Fire Mulberry Empire, at the Manchuan Pass that was adjacent to the Sanglon Empire. There were several mountain ranges here, all extending for 1,000,000 miles. The mountains were steep, strange peaks and steep cliffs could be seen everywhere. And the Manchuan Pass was the most majestic and precipitous pass at the border. Inside this impregnable pass, there were 200,000 Fire Mulberry Empire troops garrisoned all year round. They were commanded by over 40 high-ranked divine lords. A few days ago, the Fire Mulberry Emperor personally led the Imperial Guards, as well as over 100 Divine Lord powerhouses, and rushed to the Manchuan Pass to hold the fort. Yesterday the unparalleled Region Lord, Divine King White Phoenix, also brought Qin Yi and Wuxia, personally coming to the Manchuan Pass. The 200,000 troops guarding the Manchuan Pass were all dumbfounded. While excited, they also felt uneasy and suppressed. To them, for His Majesty the Emperor to personally come to the Manchuan Pass, it was already very inspiring. As for the Region Lord, that was even more unseen. To be able to see him with their own eyes, they were all fortunate of 3 lifetimes, enough to boast for a lifetime. But the garrison troops were not stupid. In these 2 days, high-ranked divine lords with high authority continuously rushed to the Manchuan Pass from all directions to gather. The atmosphere at the Manchuan Pass was very solemn, filled with killing intent like a storm was coming. The 200,000 garrison troops all had a premonition that something earth-shaking was definitely about to happen. Otherwise, there would not be so many experts and major figures gathered here. At the same time, in the commander's palace at the Manchuan Pass, Divine King White Phoenix, who was currently meditating, received a message from the heavenly smelting divine craftsman. He finished circulating his energy, held the transmission jade slip in his hand, and read the information inside with his divine sense. Originally, his expression was indifferent and his bearing was dignified. When he finished reading the information inside the jade slip, his tightly furrowed brows immediately relaxed, and the corners of his mouth even revealed a smile. Truly surprising, this is simply a pleasant surprise. Qin Yi and Wuxia had been guarding Divine King White Phoenix's 2 sides all along. Seeing him suddenly reveal a smile, Qin Yi could not resist asking, "Your Excellency Region Lord, what made you so happy?" Divine King White Phoenix weighed the transmission jade slip in his hand and said with a playful smile, "Originally, according to our estimations, those few foreign race divine kings should have arrived at the Manchuan Pass today. But they didn't come after a long time. We waited here bitterly, even wondering if something went wrong somewhere. The result, guess what? Those few foreign race divine kings actually went to Fire Dragon Mountain. Didn't the 2 of you say previously that a young divine craftsman taught the heavenly smelting divine craftsman's disciple a lesson at Fire Dragon Mountain?" Qin Yi and Wu Shui's eyes lit up, immediately revealing looks of pleasant surprise. "Your Excellency, could it be that you mean that those few foreign race divine kings also went to Fire Dragon Mountain and challenged that young divine craftsman?" Divine King White Phoenix nodded his head and said with a playful smile, "And not only did they challenge the young divine craftsman, they even ruthlessly smacked the heavenly smelting divine craftsman's face. Not only did the heavenly smelting divine craftsman lose all face in front of his disciples and grand disciples, he even lost more than 30 sets of king rank materials. Look, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman just left Fire Dragon Mountain and sent this king a message for help, asking this king to help take revenge for him." Qin Ye's eyes immediately lit up and he said with a heart full of pleasant surprise, "That's also to say that those few foreign race divine kings went to Fire Dragon Mountain, that's why they were delayed. They need at least 2.5 days before reaching Manchuan Pass. We still have ample time to prepare and can gather even more manpower." Chapter 3446. Heavens will Divine King piloted the Divine Palace and sped through the sky. 100,000 miles ahead was Sanglon Empire's border. Crossing the undulating mountain range, they would enter Fire Mulberry Empire's borders. He remembered Ji Tianxing's exhortation and put away his sloppy attitude, becoming serious and focused. The Divine Palace's flying speed was neither fast nor slow. Defensive and investigative array formations were all activated, monitoring the situation in the surrounding tens of thousands of miles. He maintained caution, guarding against sudden situations that could occur at any time. Of course, he still could not help muttering in his heart, "Isn't Sir Tianxing too cautious?" Even if the heavenly smelting divine craftsman was viciously humiliated, he might plead with Divine King White Phoenix. But the heavenly smelting divine craftsman isn't Divine King White Phoenix's disciple. White Phoenix shouldn't go to war for him and personally take action to kill us, right? Heavens will Divine King felt that if Divine King White Phoenix really took action, then his relationship with the heavenly smelting divine craftsman was definitely not ordinary. But no matter what, he would bring up Divine Induction Grotto Heaven and the Jiang clan to deter Divine King White Phoenix. As long as Divine King White Phoenix was not a brute, he definitely would not make things difficult for him and Ji Tianxing. At the same time, on the border of the two great empires inside Manchuan Pass, the 200,000-strong army had long spread out, lying in ambush in the surrounding mountain range. The many garrison troops were in teams of 1,000, respectively guarding the array corps of the various divine arrays. They were all fully armed and waiting to set off. There were also more than 260 high-level divine lords scattered throughout Flowing River Pass, hiding in the dark. They were all wearing divine armors and wielding divine weapons, silently waiting for the commander's orders. These high-ranking divine lords, a small portion was Fire Mulberry Empire's imperial guards and royal family retainers. The rest were the various great empires' elite powerhouses. Within close to 5 days, they rushed over from all directions of Fire Mulberry Domain under Domain Lord White Phoenix's orders and gathered at Manchuan Pass. In order to let them arrive in the shortest time possible, the various great empires obeyed the Domain Lord's orders and opened up the transmission divine array for them. Everyone's expressions were very solemn. They also understood in their hearts that the mission they were currently carrying out was definitely very important. Otherwise, Fire Mulberry Emperor and Domain Lord White Phoenix would also not come to Manchuan Pass personally. Manchuan Pass's commander's palace. Divine King White Phoenix sat upright on the throne at the head. She closed her eyes and rested, waiting patiently. Qin Yi and Wu Shui stood on his left and right, giving orders to the scouts and heralds that were entering and exiting the hall. Emperor Huasong stood in the main hall, followed by 4 commanders of the Imperial Guards, waiting for orders at any time. The atmosphere in the hall was oppressive, solemn, and filled with icy cold killing intent. Not long after, the various scouts and heralds finished their reports. Emperor Huasong bowed to Divine King White Phoenix and reported respectfully, "Field Master, 12 hours ago we finished setting up the trap. Now, all 12 divine arrays had been activated. The army of 200,000 was in position. More than 260 surgods were also prepared. After 2 rounds of checking, we made sure that there were no flaws or loopholes in our ambush. As long as those alien god kings show themselves, they will no longer have a chance to escape. They will definitely die." Emperor Huasong's voice was sonorous and powerful. His tone was firm and full of confidence. Divine King White Phoenix on the throne opened her eyes and nodded slightly. She said in a dignified tone, "Pass down the order to all the soldiers to be on alert. Do not relax. I have just cast a spell to predict that the godships of those alien god kings will pass by Flowing Chuan Pass before sunset. For this operation I have put in a lot of effort. In order to predict their tracks I have paid a great price. If you fail to kill those alien god kings, bring your heads to me." The words "bring your heads to me" made Emperor Huasong's body tremble. His heart was in his throat. He had guessed that this operation would be very important. But he did not expect that the field master would be so determined to kill those alien god kings. She was determined to succeed. Only then did he realize how serious this matter was. He did not dare to hesitate. He quickly bowed and said sonorously, "Yes, field master." After that he quickly turned and left the main hall to pass down the field master's order. However, just as Emperor Huasong walked to the door of the main hall, he saw a herald flying over as fast as lightning. "Report." The herald was like a bolt of lightning. He brushed past Emperor Huasong and rushed to the main hall to kneel down. Almost without waiting for White Phoenix to speak, the herald reported with the fastest speed. Reporting to Field Master, a godship was discovered 10,000 miles to the north. Suddenly hearing this news, White Phoenix, who had been gloomy and cold, suddenly had a bright look in her eyes. Her body also emitted a terrifying divine aura. Qin Yi and Wu Shui were shocked. They were full of anticipation. Even Emperor Huasong, who was at the door, was stunned for a moment. Then his blood boiled. He looked at Divine King White Phoenix with a burning gaze and exclaimed in admiration, "Domain Lord, you are truly a divine strategist." White Phoenix did not care about this flattery. She raised her hand and ordered, "Pass down the order. Prepare to meet the enemy." As she spoke, she straightened her cloak and stood up from the throne. At this moment, another herald rushed into the main hall as fast as lightning. He knelt down in the main hall and reported. "Report. Field Master, that unfamiliar godship is only 5,000 miles away from Flowing Chuan Pass. It has already entered the ambush range." Although the news this herald reported was even more shocking and exciting, it was expected. However, this was within everyone's expectations, so they didn't feel too excited. White Phoenix looked sharply outside the main hall. Her lips curled into a cold smile. She said in a dignified tone, "Let's go. Follow me to meet them. Let's see what they are capable of." Qin Yi, Wu Shui, and Emperor Huasong were full of anticipation. They hurriedly nodded and acknowledged the order. White Phoenix strode across the main hall and walked towards the door. Qin Yi, Wu Shui, and Emperor Huasong hurriedly followed. They were already imagining how the god kings of the foreign races would look like. When Divine King White Phoenix reached the entrance, another messenger rushed over as fast as lightning. Before he could report, White Phoenix raised her hand to stop him. She said, "No need to report. The target has been caught. I will go and reel in the net now." That herald was stunned. His expression became a little strange. He wanted to say something but stopped. Qin Yi saw through the clues and asked with a frown, "What are you still standing there for? If there's nothing else, you can leave." The herald then braced himself and explained, "Field Master, I have another matter to report. Just now, Lord Divine General rushed to Flowing Chuan Pass and requested to see you. He knows that you are overseeing this place and want to deal with the foreign race god kings personally. He rushed over at his fastest speed. He wants to follow you into battle no matter what. He requests that you give him a chance to take revenge personally." Heavenly Smelting Divine Craftsman? White Phoenix looked surprised. She raised her eyebrows and said with a playful smile, "This fellow came at the right time. He wants to take revenge personally? Alright, I will give him this chance." Chapter 3447. Heavens Will Divine King steered the palace and maintained a constant speed as he flew across the sky. The sun was already setting in the west, gradually descending into the horizon. Heavens Will Divine King stared straight ahead as he released his consciousness to check the surrounding situation. Flowing Creek Pass is just ahead. After crossing that pass, I will enter the Fire Mulberry Empire. He muttered to himself as he steered the palace to fly towards Flowing Creek Pass. Although his consciousness detected that there were large numbers of armored sword-wielding soldiers around the pass, scattered in the mountains and forests. But he knew that Flowing Creek Pass had 200,000 guards to begin with. Although there were many guards, they were only celestial god experts. There were not many divine lord experts. As long as no divine king experts appeared, Heavens Will Divine King would not be too concerned. To an expert like him, anyone below divine king was an ant. Even an army of 200,000 celestial gods could not do anything to him. But, as the palace entered Flowing Creek Pass, Heavens Will Divine King gradually sensed that something was amiss. Logically speaking, the guards of Flowing Creek Pass should be stationed within the pass. Only a small portion of the guards would go out to patrol. But the situation before him was different. An army of 200,000 celestial gods came out in full force and spread out around Flowing Creek Pass, forming an encirclement of 10,000 miles. Among the large army, there were over 200 high-ranking divine lords and over 300 middle-ranking and low-ranking divine lords. Those divine lords were divided into small teams and arranged in special positions. Looked like they had formed some kind of array formation. Heavens Will Divine King immediately frowned and muttered to himself, "Those divine lords and 200,000 guards have formed an encirclement. It seems like they are waiting for rabbits to come to them? That can't be. Fire Mulberry Empire and Sanglon Empire have always been at peace." With White Phoenix Divine King suppressing, the various large empires did not dare to start a war. If not to deal with Sanglon Empire, then who is the target of the 200,000 guards? Could it be young Master Tianxing? White Phoenix ordered Flowing Creek Pass to let the 200,000 guards intercept young Master Tianxing. In a blink of an eye, Heavens Will Divine King analyzed the situation before him and sensed that something was amiss. That's not right. Even a fool knows that with just that army of 200,000 celestial gods, it is impossible to stop a few divine kings. Even if they set up a divine array formation is useless. Therefore, there's absolutely still a divine king powerhouse holding down the fort inside Boundless Pass. At the thought of this, God King Tian will no longer hesitated as he immediately activated the spatial god array in the palace. Regardless of whether his analysis was right or wrong, he had to teleport the palace 10,000 miles away and immediately cross the Flowing Creek Pass to escape the encirclement of the defending army. Shua. The palace, which looked like a divine worship, immediately lit up with a dazzling white light and released powerful spatial divine power fluctuations. The palace was about to break through space and teleport thousands of miles away. At this critical moment, the dim Manchuan Pass lit up with resplendent multicolored divine light, illuminating the area within a radius of 10,000 miles. Voila! 5-colored divine light appeared from all directions, forming a massive halo that sealed off an area with a radius of over 5,000 kilometers. In the blink of an eye, the circle of light extended into a curtain of light that covered the sky, forming a huge divine formation that sealed off the area. The space within a 10,000-mile radius froze. The divine matrix was activated, releasing an invisible pressure that enveloped the Palace of Heaven's will. Suddenly, the palace's teleportation was interrupted. The space around the palace was like a frozen block of ice, squeezing it hard. Gotcha. With a series of shattering sounds, the divine light on the surface of the Palace of Heavens will quickly shattered. But this was only the beginning of the ambush. After the first divine matrix was activated, the surroundings of the flowing creek pass lit up with resplendent divine light again. Shua. Shua. One after another, massive light screens formed in the sky, sealing off an area with a radius of 5,000 kilometers. Outside the first sealing divine matrix, one divine matrix after another was activated, completely sealing off the area. No matter how capable God King Tianwil was, he could not break these divine matrices in a short period of time, much less escape from the flowing creek pass. Damn it! We've fallen into an ambush. They actually set up so many divine matrices in the flowing creek pass? God King Tianwil frowned as a cold glint flashed in his eyes. But he did not panic in the face of danger. He controlled the palace to stop in the sky and calmly observed the situation. At the same time, tens of thousands of divine lights lit up in the flowing creek pass as earth-shattering battle cries rang out. Kill. They've been surrounded. Charge. Nearly 100,000 well-equipped defenders, brandishing all sorts of divine weapons, surged out from all directions and charged at the Palace of Heaven's will. Furthermore, outside the commander's palace in the flowing creek pass, Bai Feng also led Qin Yi, Wuxia and Emperor Huasong across the sky, flying towards the Palace of Heaven's will. Of course, just as the four of them left the commander's palace, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman flew over. He flew in front of divine King Bai Feng and bowed, saying in an agitated tone, "Greetings, Domain Lord. This king was once humiliated by those foreign race divine kings, and I swear to avenge this grudge. This king wants to take revenge with his own hands and kill the enemy with his own hands, please allow it." Divine King Bai Feng glanced at him and nodded slightly. Heavenly smelting divine craftsman is willing to help this king, how can this king not agree? Heavenly smelting divine craftsman was overjoyed as he hurriedly cupped his fists and bowed. "Many thanks, Domain Lord." Following that, he joined the group and followed Bai Feng Divine King to the Palace of Heaven's will. After a few breaths, the encirclement of close to 100,000 guards closed in, surrounding the Palace of Heaven's will. Everyone wielded their swords and sabers, aiming at the palace that flickered with divine light. As long as the commander gave the order, they would launch an attack with all their might. And at this time, Divine King Bai Feng and the rest also rushed to the scene. When they were still 100 miles away from the palace, everyone stopped in the sky, watching with cold eyes. Everyone saw with their own eyes that the resplendent, divine ship continuously shattered under the combined suppression of the 9 divine arrays. Before long, the divine ship collapsed, turning into a golden palace with a radius of 100,000 feet. Seeing this scene, Divine King Bai Feng and the rest all frowned, revealing puzzled looks. "Domain Lord, this divine ship seems to be different from the scene you predicted?" Qin Yi could not resist opening his mouth to ask. Wu Shui also nodded and seconded. "Domain Lord, in the scene you predicted previously, those few foreign race divine kings were riding on an azure divine ship. But this divine ship in front of us is a palace. Could it be that we stopped the wrong people?" Emperor Huasong did not know the truth and did not have the right to speak, so he maintained silence. Heavenly smelting divine craftsman stared at the Palace of Heaven's will. After carefully observing for a moment, he suddenly said agitatedly, "We didn't stop the wrong people. This king recognizes this palace. This is that young divine craftsman's palace. It's him who provoked this king at Fire Dragon Mountain. That's why this incident happened. Towards Heaven's Will Divine King, he also hated him to the bones. If he could borrow Divine King Bai Feng's hands to eliminate Heaven's Will Divine King, he was naturally very happy and looking forward to it. However, Divine King Bai Feng frowned and said in a solemn voice, "Those few foreign race divine kings are this king's primary target." Chapter 34-48. Indeed, Divine King White Phoenix made such a big fuss just to intercept and kill Ji Tianxing and company. After all, this was stellar aspect Divine Envoy's order and also represented the will of the Azura God Emperor. As the Fire Mulberry Domain Lord, Divine King White Phoenix naturally had to carry it out unconditionally. But Divine King White Phoenix was not interested in the matter of Divine Craftsman Sky Smelting being humiliated by other Divine Craftsmen, nor did he think of avenging him. His own skills were inferior and he lost face in front of his disciples and grand disciples. Who could he blame? Seeing Divine King White Phoenix's firm attitude, Divine Craftsman Sky Smelting immediately became anxious. He pointed at Heaven's Will Palace and said in a certain tone, "Your Excellency Domain Lord, this king saw them at Fire Dragon Mountain and even competed with them, so I understand them better. That young divine craftsman is in cahoots with a few foreign race divine kings. They deliberately schemed against this king and joined hands to put on a two-man show, causing this king to lose face." Hearing Divine Craftsman Sky Smelting's words, Divine King White Phoenix frowned again. He looked at Divine Craftsman Sky Smelting with a dignified gaze and said in a deep voice, "Don't make irresponsible remarks to this king for the sake of taking revenge. You have to think carefully about the price of using and deceiving this king." No one was stupid. Divine King White Phoenix also would not completely believe Divine Craftsman Sky Smelting. Divine Craftsman Sky Smelting's expression immediately turned ugly and somewhat hesitant. But the words had already been spoken and could not be taken back. If he cowered now, it would prove that he was using Divine King White Phoenix to take revenge. Therefore, Divine Craftsman Sky Smelting weighed the pros and cons before saying firmly, "Your Excellency Domain Lord, rest assured. Every word this king said is true." Regardless of the consequences, Divine Craftsman Sky Smelting decided to take a gamble. Divine King White Phoenix gave him a deep look and did not say anything else. He ordered in a deep voice, "Search that palace." Qin Yi and Wu Shui said yes at the same time and drew their divine weapons and flew towards Heaven's Will Palace. And at this time Heaven's Will Palace's door opened. Wearing a white cloak, the white-haired Heaven's Will Divine King walked out of the palace's door. He thought to himself, "Indeed, as I expected, White Phoenix really brought Divine Craftsman Sky Smelting and two deputies to set up an ambush here, waiting for us to walk into the trap." On the surface he remained calm and collected. His expression and eyes were cold and indifferent. Standing at the entrance of the palace he coldly swept his gaze across Bai Feng, the divine craftsman Qin Yi, and Wu Shui as his lips curled into a cold smile. If this king didn't guess wrongly, the person in front is the Fire Mulberry Domain's Lord, Divine King White Phoenix? Jiang Tianyi stared at Divine King White Phoenix, asking the obvious. Bai Feng looked at him coldly and said in a dignified voice, "That's me. Are you the divine blacksmith who set up an arena at Mount Fire Dragon to recruit disciples?" "That's right." Jiang Tianyi nodded, a mocking sneer on his face as he said, "A straightforward person does not resort to insinuations. This king will get straight to the point." White Phoenix Divine King making such a big fuss and laying down an inescapable net in flowing river pass, could it be to vent his anger for the heavenly smelting divine craftsman? It was just a spar and competition in the way of refining. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman's skills were not as good as others, so he lost to this king. What? The heavenly smelting divine craftsman is a sore loser, and White Phoenix Domain Lord also plans to silence him. Divine King White Phoenix frowned fiercely and shouted angrily, "Don't distort the truth and slander this king. This king is not interested in the exchange and spar between you two divine craftsmen. However, you have a close relationship with the fugitives this king wants to capture. This king is under the orders of Lord Divine Envoy and specially set up a checkpoint here to check every divine ship that passes by. Open the palace now, this king wants to check carefully." Fugitives? Capture under the orders of the Divine Envoy? Jiang Tianyi was momentarily stunned and frowned in confusion. However, he immediately reacted and sneered disdainfully. Divine King White Phoenix, the excuse you came up with is really low-level and boring. If you want to help the heavenly smelting divine craftsman take revenge, just say it. This king even respects you for being domineering. As a domain lord, don't you even have this bit of responsibility and courage? Divine King White Phoenix's face turned gloomy and his eyes flickered with a cold light. He asked in a deep voice, "Brat, looks like you don't plan to cooperate and want to go against this king?" He was too lazy to explain to Jiang Tianyi and would not take out Star Aspect Divine Envoy's order to prove that he was really carrying out a mission. After all, he was a domain lord and the other party was a nobody. Ha ha. Jiang Tianyi laughed loudly and weighed a crystal in his hand. He sneered and said, "This king wants to use the image recording crystal to record this matter completely. This will also let the other domain lords and the various divine kings see that the Fire Mulberry domain lord is using his position to avenge private wrongs." After saying that, he inserted his divine power into the image recording crystal and activated the array formation in the crystal. All the surrounding scenes and sounds were clearly recorded in the crystal and were preserved. Jiang Tianyi even said to the image recording crystal, "This king came to the Fire Mulberry domain and set up an arena at Fire Dragon Mountain to accept the challenge of all the weapon craftsmen and choose disciples from them. The heavenly smelting divine craftsman's disciples all lost and lost face." Thus, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman personally came to challenge this king but was also crushed by this king and lost miserably in front of everyone. Who would have thought that in order to help the heavenly smelting divine craftsman, Domain Lord Baifeng actually set up a massive ambush at Flowing River Pass and even found a dignified excuse. Jiang Tianyi explained the cause and process of the matter in a concise manner. Looking at his posture, he would definitely release the image recording crystal to the public and let the various domain lords and divine kings see Divine King Baifeng's ugly actions clearly. Divine King Baifeng's anger surged as her eyes shot out a cold light. Qin Yi and Wu Shui also revealed anger as they accumulated divine power in their bodies, ready to attack Jiang Tianyi at any time. Only the heavenly smelting divine craftsman was filled with pride and was in a good mood. Previously, he was worried that Divine King Baifeng would not help him deal with Jiang Tianyi. Who would have thought that Jiang Tianyi was so arrogant and did not know what was good for him, offending Divine King Baifeng so easily? Thus, the heavenly smelting divine craftsman decided to fan the flames and laughed loudly. "Ha! Kid, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are? You dare to threaten Domain Lord Baifeng? Image recording crystal? Record it all, it is useless. If you can release it to the world, this king will twist my head off and kick it like a ball. You can forget about walking out of Flowing Creek Pass today." These few words from the heavenly smelting divine craftsman further proved that Divine King Baifeng was here to kill Jiang Tianyi. Divine King Baifeng took the blame for nothing and was even more furious in her heart. But she could not fall out with him in public and reprimand the heavenly smelting divine craftsman. Jiang Tianyi shook the image recording crystal in his hand, the cold smile on his face deepening as he said loudly, "Indeed, this king guessed correctly. Domain Lord Baifeng is making such a big fuss because you want to kill this king. However, Baifeng, do you know who this king is? For a mere lesser divine craftsman, you want to kill this king to the last man? Have you considered the consequences?" The moment these words came out, the heavenly smelting divine craftsmen Qin Yi and Wu Shui were all stunned. Divine King Baifeng also narrowed both eyes and asked in a low voice, "Are you threatening this king? Then this king wants to see just what kind of backing you have to actually give you such great confidence."